Chapter 24. Click, click, went George's and Fred's wands in rapid succession. Ron, puffed up like a bright orange life buoy, floated toward the ceiling, his tiny eyes going wide. His arms and legs stuck out at absurd angles, each stretch punctuated by a soft pop like an overinflated balloon about to burst. George, standing directly beneath him, gave a thoughtful sniff, either deciding Ron had suffered enough or worrying about Mrs. Weasley's wrath, or worse, Bill's, and flicked his wand once more. A bolt of blue light struck Ron with a sharp puff, puff, puff. Ron ricocheted off the walls, tumbling through the air as though he'd been launched from a catapult. Not to be outdone, Fred swished his own wand. Invisible ripples of magic rippled across the room, halting all motion. 2 minutes later, with a soft deflation sound, Ron shrank back to his normal size and collapsed onto the dining table. His hair stuck up in damp spikes, and milk from the overturned pot drenched his robes. "Enough?" Fred grinned. George tapped his wand again. The broken plate pieced itself back together. The scattered decorations leapt up and returned to their shelves. Even Ron's torn robes stitched themselves perfectly, and the stray milk streamed back into the pot until it stood upright and spotless once more. In a blink, the kitchen looked as though nothing had happened, except that nobody in their right mind would touch that milk again. Fred yanked his wand back as soon as he spotted Ron's gang closing in. "I'm going to tell Mum," Ron barked, clutching the back of his neck and glaring hard at Fred and George. "Who told you to badmouth us?" George shot back, crossing his arms. "But we're the ones helping you peddle that merchandise and lining our pockets with galleons," Fred retorted. "Exactly," George added. "We're following your orders to the letter. You should be grateful. We've been working and making real progress," Fred finished for him, flashing a grin. "For Gryffindor, for Hogwarts, for Britain." The twins punched the air in perfect unison. Then they turned their beaming faces to Harry and Ginny. "Harry, Ginny, you two, why aren't you helping me out here?" Ron demanded, spinning toward them. Harry and Ginny exchanged a quick, guilty look. Ginny shrugged, forcing a smile. "We kind of forgot." Ron's eyes went wide. "Really? What were you two whispering about just now?" Before Ginny could answer, Fred and George pointed their wands at themselves and vanished. A faint ripple in the air was all that remained, betraying the subtle disillusionment charm they'd used rather than a more dramatic apparition. Ron whipped back around, bewildered. Harry shrugged. "You asked me where I'd been." Ginny shrugged too. "And I guess I lost track of time." "You've been coming in late almost every morning lately," Mrs. Weasley remarked over breakfast. Ron glanced at Ginny. "Mom and Dad aren't surprised," he pointed out, though he'd been dying to ask her exactly where she'd been slipping off to. Harry, rousing from his own speculation about how Fred and George vanished so thoroughly, looked at Ginny in surprise. He, too, was curious. "Ron, you prat," Ginny scolded, smiling. Ron shrugged. "Well, Sirius can get the Daily Prophet early." "But we're not doing too badly either," Ginny interrupted. She turned to her parents. "You know Luna's family, the Quibbler? I've been doing some typesetting and organizing for them at their place." Mr. and Mrs. Weasley exchanged amused glances. Ginny nodded emphatically. "You two know about it already, right?" Ron's eyes went wide. "The Quibbler?" The same paper that first exposed the crumple-horned snorkeler revealed the rediscovered incarnation of Fanir and broke the Elder Wand story. He leaned forward, excitement shining in his face. Harry and Ginny exchanged a quick, skeptical look, but as Ron rattled off the Quibbler's headlines, both of them realized there was nothing left to doubt. "I think my smoke bottle needs some serious publicity," Ron muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Sirius refuses to publish or promote my invention," he added with a frown. "Mother's orders." He blinked, then looked at Ginny in sudden bewilderment. "Hold on, wasn't the Quibbler Luna's paper?" "Ginny," he pressed, "do you have any pull there? Could you run an article, say on one of my greatest creations?" He hurried on before she could answer. "I'm even willing to pay 10 galleons. Ginny's face went stern. "That's enough, Ronald. The Quibbler isn't for sale. It's the voice of those who've been written off. Truths the world calls lies." She straightened, shrugging free of Harry's concerned arm. "We don't take bribes, never have. If we did, we'd be famous by now." She paused, eyes flashing. "You know how impossible it is to get a publishing license in the wizarding world. Even the smallest paper needs deep pockets. Yet Mr. Lovegood does it all on principles. He publishes only what the rest of the world deems ridiculous. With that, she turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving Ron blinking in her wake. Ron folded his arms. Apart from that one story that's been all over the headlines, the Quibbler is absolute nonsense. Dad even subscribed to support Luna's father. He's a decent man, but as soon as they printed that rubbish, he canceled his subscription on the spot. Ginny stared at him, wide-eyed. Ron was starting to think she'd gone mad. Xenophilius must have used some of his odd magic on her, and it clearly rubbed off on Luna too, making her seem just as eccentric. And really, who could take seriously a paper that claimed the Office for the Prohibition of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts was actually Fudge's secret research department for Muggle weapons? Yet despite all of that, the Quibbler had suddenly become the hottest read in the wizarding world. Seeing an opportunity, Ron decided to pitch his GG article to them. After all, why not ride its newfound fame? Just like the name suggests, Ginny began, her gaze bright, the Quibbler exists to give a platform to voices that don't fit the mainstream, to sing a different tune. Sometimes the only people who know the real story are the ones everyone else dismisses. Remember when the Quibbler first published the Chamfered Snorkeler report? Nearly every magical zoologist called it sensationalism, but the facts were on our side. Ron raised an eyebrow. Fine, but it did earn us plenty of ridicule. Ridicule isn't a reason to stop, Ginny said firmly. Even if some stories turn out to be false, readers can enjoy them as harmless fantasy. Besides, these odd tales stretch people's imaginations and encourage them to look at the world from fresh angles. She straightened up with a small, proud smile. Isn't that what my mist bottle invention is all about? Unusual ideas that challenge expectations. Ron chuckled and tousled her hair affectionately. Ginny, I'm your brother. I'm far too biased to judge your inventions fairly, but Luna might give you an honest opinion. We're both Ravenclaws, after all, and her boyfriend Ryan, he's a good friend of mine. I'm sure he'd persuade her to take a serious look at your mist bottle. Ginny frowned. Ron, you're making it sound like I can't win on my own merits. He grinned. Humph. Lately, Luna and Ryan have been inseparable. I'll get him to vouch for you. Just wait. I don't think you have the nerve to take them on, Ginny said with a smirk, one eyebrow quirked in challenge. Harry stared at her, stunned. What? He blurted out. A surge of jealousy washed over him. Ginny had been spending the last 2 weeks with Ryan without even mentioning it, and with Ryan's effortless charisma to boot? His chest tightened, and he felt his confidence draining away. Chapter 25, Little Hangleton. You still have a lot of questions for Ryan, Ginny said softly, glancing at her fiancé. She'd misread the surprise in Harry's voice. I do, Harry admitted. He'd been so wrapped up in poring over the Mirror World's secrets and in wedding preparations that he'd almost forgotten about his task panel, an ethereal display only he could see, hovering just beyond his field of vision. He frowned, realizing it hadn't updated in over 2 weeks. It felt as if some unseen force had been scrambling his memory. Harry blinked. Suddenly, fresh text appeared on the panel. Task 3. Locate Little Hangleton in the Mirror World and summon the Mirror Beast. Note, this Mirror Beast is not the Pluto Dragon. It will manifest automatically upon your arrival. You must defeat it without summoning the Pluto Dragon. Harry's brow furrowed. The description was concise, but, unlike earlier tasks, it offered no explanation of purpose or reward. The only guidance he'd seen before always spelled out why the task existed. For example, the last quest had been designed to strengthen one's magic of love. Here, the objective was clear, but the rationale remained a mystery. Accepting yourself can turn love's shield into a razor-sharp sword against the outside world. Rejecting yourself only reinforces its defense. Either way, that strength becomes a guiding light between the afterlife and the living, and with the resurrection stone, it might even lead you back to your mother. Harry stared at the newly refreshed task description. Why did it insist on summoning? It warned that the Mirror Beast would appear alongside him. But if that were true, why couldn't the Pluto Dragon be called in the same way? And why had the quest only reappeared now? Was Ryan deliberately keeping him at arm's length? Or had Ryan somehow made the task panel vanish? Frustrated, Harry pulled out his phone and messaged his friend for answers. I'm exhausted. I need to rest, he lied, rubbing his tired eyes. He climbed the stairs as if sleep were all he wanted, though his mind raced with questions. Ryan's silence felt like rejection. Didn't he know Harry was about to cross the ultimate taboo of resurrection? After all, the death god was no myth, and both their families had once stood in its shadow. Lying in the darkened room, Harry's thoughts circled back to that single, burning question. Why now? Why summon this dragon when the mirror beast came so easily? He pressed his phone to the pillow, vowing that come dawn he would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Harry's footsteps echoed softly as he climbed the stairs, his mind racing over the old legend of the three brothers. The eldest had been outwitted by death himself, which meant his descendants, like Ryan, could never truly claim that power. The third brother, however, had cheated death and gone on to live his days in peace. Harry realized with a start that the winning legacy must lie with him. He paused on the landing, lost in thought. Ginny slipped an arm around his waist and guided him forward. "Harry, are you all right?" she asked, concern in her voice. He gave her a wan smile. "Just a bit sleepy, that's all." Below them, Bill's voice rang out. "Fine, Ginny. Don't mind me. I'll wait out here." Harry and Ginny both turned. Bill's eyes were sharp with suspicion. He'd caught Harry's feigned exhaustion in an instant and was clearly convinced Harry's real plan was to lure Ginny upstairs alone. Bill strolled over and folded his arms, speaking to Ginny, but really sending a message to Harry. "Take your time. I've got nowhere to go." Ginny bristled at Bill's tone. She hated the way he always imagined the worst. Couldn't he see Harry actually look drained? Yes. Harry was nervous. His stopwatch heartbeats gave it away, but there was nothing untoward about it. "What's so funny, Bill?" she shot back. "He's genuinely tired." Bill lifted one eyebrow, his grin unfazed. "Just making sure reality matches his story." Harry pressed a hand to his chest, cheeks warming. He did need a moment alone with Ginny. There was something important he had to tell her. But it wasn't what Bill suspected. From halfway down the stairs, Ron peered up, frowning in confusion at the charged silence. He couldn't have guessed what Harry and Ginny were about to face, or how quickly things might change once they stepped through that doorway. How could he have been left behind in just minutes? He had to find Luna, but the thought terrified him. Ryan was no ordinary wizard. With a single flick of his wrist, he could pluck them off the moon and drop them back on Earth in an instant. There was no way he'd risk Ryan's wrath, no matter how desperate he felt. Harry stepped into the hushed grandeur of the Mirror World's British Library. He recognized this place from home, London, with its hidden Diagon Alley just around the corner. But everything here seemed sharper, more three-dimensional, as if the city had materialized inside a crystal. Founded in July 1973, this library was the product of 5 great institutions merged together: the Old British Museum Library, the National Central Library, the National Science and Invention Reference Library, the National Science and Technology Lending Library, and the British National Bibliography Company. Its holdings were split into 2 vast realms: humanities and social sciences on one side, science, technology, and industry on the other. Every book and newspaper ever published in the UK had to appear on these shelves. Journals and musical scores, whether modern compositions or centuries-old manuscripts, were preserved here by law. The humanities and social sciences wing alone boasted 13 million volumes, rare Oriental and Indian collections, the National Sound Archives, handwritten manuscripts, maps, newspapers. The list went on. Everywhere Harry looked, he saw row upon row of dark wooden stacks, each aisle a corridor of possibilities. He paused in front of a towering shelf labeled Oriental and Indian Studies, wondering where to begin. Somewhere in this labyrinth lay the clue that would unlock the Mirror World's greatest secret, and perhaps lead him back to his friends. Drawing a deep breath, Harry stepped forward, determined to find it. 10 minutes earlier, having politely declined Ginny's company, Harry slipped through the glass of his bedroom window and stepped into the Mirror World. Mrs. Weasley and the others had carefully removed every mirror from his room. They were convinced that realm held too many dangers. But Harry needed answers he couldn't find at Hogwarts. He appeared in the vast reading room of the British Library. Here, the archives housed the most detailed map of the United Kingdom, exactly what he needed. He didn't have to consult Hogwarts. Wizarding Britain map. The Wizarding world in Britain simply overlapped the Muggle map. Little Hangleton couldn't be a secret wizard village. Hogsmeade was the only one of those. Instead, he was hunting for the Muggle settlement of Little Hangleton. At a long oak table, Harry conjured a quill and unfurled the map, which the mirror world's magic displayed completely reversed. 10 Little Hangletons in all, he murmured, scanning the names. Only one site matched the clues. It lay just beside Great Hangleton. In the map's lower left quadrant, though here it appeared reversed, he drew a neat circle around it. He paused, satisfied. Then, eyes steeled with determination, he whispered, "Clear water like a spring," and pulled out his wand, ready for whatever might follow. Beneath Harry's deliberate control, the swirling mist settled on the smooth ground, spreading into a thin, glassy film that reflected the world like a perfect mirror. He flicked his wand once more, and the point he had circled on his map shimmered as though sliced by an invisible blade. In an instant, that very spot lifted from the surface and floated into his waiting palm. Taking a steadying breath, Harry stepped onto the reflective sheet. Darkness closed in around him as he whispered the precise address under his breath. The mirror vibrated in response, pulling him forward as surely as a magnet draws iron. Then, just as suddenly, light returned. He stood in a shallow pool of water, droplets cascading through the air. In front of him stood a weathered wooden signpost with 2 arrowed planks, one reading Big Hangleton, 5 miles, the other Little Hangleton, 1 mile. Without hesitation, Harry set off toward Little Hangleton. A narrow path lay before him, flanked by towering hedgerows. Overhead, the summer sky stretched endlessly blue. With every step, an unsettling sensation grew at the edges of his mind, as if something unseen was calling him forward. That presence, he knew, must be the mirror beast he had sworn to confront. And somewhere ahead, at the place his magic had led him, the unknown creature waited. He finally understood why the instructions had been titled so cryptically. At the bend in the path, he closed his eyes for a moment and told himself, "Turn right." He complied, plunging down the hillside on a steep trail. Suddenly, the slope gave way to a broad valley, and before him lay a small village, nestled between 2 rugged hills. At its center stood an old stone church, its adjoining cemetery unmistakable even at this distance. There was no mistaking it. This was Little Hangleton. Chapter 26. The Three-Eyed Thestral. Harry paused at the crest of the slope, a sudden chill running down his spine. That unmistakable sense of dread wasn't coming from the village behind him, nor from the brooding mansion perched on the opposite hillside. Instead, it emanated from the path winding before him. The trail plunged steeply downward, forcing Harry into a quick jog to keep his footing. He rounded a bend and spotted a break in the rusty fence. Beyond it lay a narrow dirt road, hemmed in by towering hedges whose gnarled branches formed a dark, twisting corridor. With each step, his heartbeat thundered in his ears. This was the same oppressive pressure he'd felt in Voldemort's presence, an echo of the Horcruxes calling to him. His scar flared to life, pounding painfully as tendrils of cold magic curled around his thoughts. Deep in his chest, the phoenix stirred, its plaintive cry echoing in his mind. Driven by forces he couldn't name, Harry launched himself down the embankment. He felt as light as a leaf caught in an updraft, gliding until he landed gently at the end of the path. Ahead lay a forest of ancient trees, their twisted trunks and suffocating shadows whispering of dark power. Harry knew, in that instant, that he stood on the threshold of a real dark wizard's domain, and that nothing would ever be the same again. Harry paused at the forest's edge, struck by how the tall oaks and pines swallowed every glimmer of daylight. Above him, the sky was a pale, cloudless blue, but down below, the valley lay shrouded in shadow, and a lone house peeked out from a tangle of ancient branches and vines. Strangely, the sight felt familiar. He'd never seen anything that so perfectly matched the description of a wizard's dwelling in an old fairy tale. Walls mottled with moss, a sagging roof with tiles askew, exposed rafters jutting out here and there, nettles choking the ground around it, and windows so caked in grime they looked like misshapen eyes that hadn't been washed in decades. It was exactly where he needed to be. Harry flicked his wand. The scrap of parchment in his pocket leapt into the air, crackled with sparks, then burned itself to ash. Almost simultaneously, Ravenclaw's diadem shot forth from another pocket and settled on his messy hair as if drawn by an invisible force. This ancient crown was his trump card, its wisdom already stirring in his mind, bolstered by the faint chill of magic pulsing across his forehead. And then a realization hit him. The Mirror Beast, the terrifying creature that had felt as malevolent as Voldemort himself, wouldn't show its face here. The gloom was too deep, the light too feeble, not a single ray could pierce this living night. If the beast thrived on reflections and shadows, it would never find purchase in such impenetrable darkness. Harry drew a steady breath. If his theory was correct, he might just have a chance at whatever game lay hidden inside that moss-covered door. With cautious optimism, and the weight of Ravenclaw's diadem steadying his resolve, he stepped into the forest's cold embrace. The panes across the way were caked in grime. Harry inhaled slowly, and with his exhale, flame-tongued magic burst from his mouth and nostrils. It swirled above him, condensing into a blazing red sun. Light exploded outward, and the dirt on those windows vanished as if snow under a sudden dawn. The earth trembled beneath a deafening roar, and nearby trees shuddered as though struck by a derailed train. From the fissure in the ground, a massive black shape lunged straight at Harry. But the crimson orb he'd summoned met the assault head-on, colliding with a thunderous crack. Shockwaves rippled through the valley, snapping every trunk in their path. Then at last, the true sun broke through the centuries-old gloom, its rays touching land that had never known daylight. Harry braced himself, gripping his wand with both hands. He thrust it forward, manifesting an invisible shield that took the brunt of the blow. When the impact subsided, the shadowed creature stood before him. It raised a full, sinewy neck, veined in pulsing green, and fixed its gaze on the red sun hovering over Harry's head. He watched it clearly now, every throb of those unnatural veins laid bare in the blazing light. The creature that faced him had the head of a dragon, the body of a horse, and bat-like wings, truly a night star. Yet it was nothing like the frail legends described. Its eyes burned a vivid green, and its entire frame was sheathed in knotted muscle and bulging veins. Within those veins pulsed emerald-tinged blood, flecked with glowing spots that raced so swiftly the beast itself seemed to emanate an otherworldly, deathly radiance. Harry drew a steadying breath, pressed his wand to his chest, and felt his flesh lose its solidity. The rocky ground beneath him turned to quicksand, swallowing him in a surge of rubble and dust. Deep underground, among jagged stones and shadow, his body curled into a tight sphere. Invisible magic wove around him, supplying every particle of air he needed. Then, reaching out with his mind, he pierced the crimson orb that held the monster's gaze. "Cast off!" His voice rang out like a clarion from within that red sun. There came a crack, sharp as ice breaking, and the hush that followed shimmered with possibility. From the heart of the crimson light sprang a single, soaring note, a sacred song, pure and triumphant. Then a phoenix broke free. It was magnificent, plumes of molten gold and fire-tipped crimson, a train of tail feathers as lavish as a peacock's, and talons that shone like burnished bronze. Around its body danced a living halo of flame, each flicker a testament to its ancient power and boundless grace. The fiery red sun cracked open like an eggshell. As the phoenix unfurled its wings and soared, the shell shattered into blazing meteors that hurtled toward the monster below. The creature beat its wings, sending shockwaves rippling through the air, and deflected every ember. With a deafening roar, it lunged, jaws wide, its fangs gleaming. Talons clashed against teeth in a staccato of metal-on-metal echoes. A crimson beam and a green flare darted through the sky, colliding in mid-air. Scorching fragments rained down, gouging steaming furrows into the scorched earth. From the ruins of a shattered tree, sparks ignited into hungry flames. Through the blaze, Harry, his body hidden beneath the illusion, watched in disbelief. This mirror beast was unlike any enemy he'd faced. Ever since Ryan had christened his signature spell Phoenix Incarnation, Harry's virtual phoenix form had been unbeatable. No matter how fierce Vampire Snape, the Headless Knight Sirius, or Troll Dumbledore turned out to be, none had posed a real threat. But now, the mirror beast shook off the scorching debris and fixed him with mirrored eyes. For the first time, Harry wondered whether his greatest power might not be enough. Harry crouched just beyond the fringe of roaring flames, watching the colossal phoenix flap its wings. This was no ordinary creature of rebirth and song, but a blazing avatar born of his mother's love, so potent that even Voldemort's original mirror-formed double had staggered under its power and collapsed back into his master. When that avatar had fused with this bird, it had ignited a halo of pure, reality-shredding fire. Harry still grimaced at the memory of his own experiment in the Mirror Realm. He'd tried to replicate that conflagration once and accidentally torched all of London. Fortunately, any distortion in the Mirror Realm snaps back to match real-world geography, but the lesson was clear. He couldn't risk such catastrophic magic again. Searching for Little Hangleton through the British Museum had yielded nothing, and he was running out of options. No creature, no Dark Lord should be so invincible. There had to be a weakness. After all, this monstrosity had to be the Mirror Beast counterpart to one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Through the flickering inferno that already lapped 5 miles into the valley and even threatened Big Hangleton, Harry spotted what he'd been looking for. Nestled at the heart of Veep, the creature's vast black plumage was a stone. Jet black and polished as obsidian, it pulsed with sickly green veins ringed by coarse tufts of fur. A web of overlapping triangles and circles fractured its surface, an unblinking, occult eye staring back at him. Harry's heart pounded. There lay his target, and perhaps at last his only hope of defeating the Phoenix-born horror. Chapter 27 completed Mission 3. The night air above Little Hangleton and beyond into Big Hangleton rippled with heat and screamed with crackling flames. A wind-whipped inferno engulfed the countryside, churning into a living vortex of fire. Through that hellscape darted a strange creature, slender as a thestral, yet entirely black, its sinews laced with veins of glowing green. Its eyes, 2 bright emerald orbs, burned through smoke and ash, while a pulsating third eye emblazoned on each wing beat in silent rhythm, exuding an aura of cold, unrelenting death. In the very heart of the blaze, a magnificent phoenix hovered, its feathers a seamless tapestry of gold and red flame. With a roar that shook the scorched ground, it summoned walls of fire that spiraled outward, reshaping the inferno into a living barrier. Towering flames lashed at the night thestral, but the creature faced them unflinchingly. A faint green sheen shimmered across its sleek hide, a protective membrane wove from the creature's own aura. With each beat of its hidden eye, it healed and reforged that barrier, shielding itself from the phoenix's searing onslaught. The air around the thestral crackled with deathly energy, an invisible force that would kill any ordinary beast on contact, yet seemed to sustain this creature's every step. Step by cautious step, the thestral pressed forward through the rolling blaze. Its wings, folded tight to protect their vulnerable membranes, flexed in anticipation. Each beat of its third eye grew stronger, feeding the green halo that streamed behind it like a comet's tail. The fire phoenix met its progress with renewed fury. Sweeping arcs of flame blazed brighter, hot winds roared, and the ground trembled as the vortex spun faster. But the thestral would not be driven back. Its glowing eyes locked onto a distant figure, too small to be seen through all that smoke, yet unmistakably human in shape. Whatever mission had drawn it here would not be undone by even the fiercest fire. As the two creatures closed on one another, the heat reached a blistering crescendo. Sparks rained down like deadly hail, and the night sky streaked crimson. The phoenix's wings beat with thunderous force, challenging the night thestral's advance. In response, the creature's third eye pulsed with a chilling emerald light that could freeze the life from any mortal being. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. 2 titans of flame and shadow, each powered by an otherworldly aura, hovered on the brink of collision. Then, with a final, echoing roar, they lunged forward, ready to unleash their full fury upon one another. Their clash would decide the fate of everything caught between fire and shadow. The monster blurred into a roiling afterimage as it accelerated, its surrounding inferno feeding the power of its third eye. In a sudden, violent surge, its dragon-like head smashed through the wall of flames and clamped onto the phoenix's neck. A piercing, elegant shriek rang out. The phoenix's wings froze mid-beat, and the fiery halo that had danced around its body sputtered and died. "It's time," the voice boomed. The creature hesitated, that single word throwing it off balance. From the opposite edge of the blaze, Phoenix Harry burst forth. His golden talons sank into the monster's third eye, the jet-black stone, and wrenched it free. At that instant, the beast dissolved into a swirl of smoke and vanished. The black stone slipped from Phoenix Harry's grasp, tumbling to the charred earth below. The flames recoiled as if repelled, revealing scorched, fractured ground. From the ashes, a human form curled in on itself, then slowly pushed upright. Harry's breath caught in his throat. He had been pulled from the earth by that very stone. The gem suddenly pulsed with a dark, flickering light. No, it was shifting, reshaping itself. Light stabbed into Harry's chest, and an agony so fierce it felt like his heart was being ripped out surged through him. In the last instant before unconsciousness claimed him, he fixed his gaze on the phoenix soaring above. On the two towns on either side of him, tongues of flame stretched skyward, thinning into glowing threads that streamed into the bird's open beak. As the final embers vanished, the phoenix dipped its brilliant head toward Harry, then shot upward in a dazzling arc. A thunderous crack echoed across the night, and fireworks blossomed overhead in a riot of color. Harry groaned, pressing a hand to his throbbing brow as he forced his eyes open. The blackened, charred earth was gone. He lay amid overgrown weeds in a moonlit cemetery. To his left, the dark silhouette of a small church peeked out from behind a stand of ancient yews. On his right, a grassy hill climbed into shadow. The air was cool and still. How long had he been out? And where was he now? Greater Hangleton or Little Hangleton? But Harry didn't dwell on it. A soft green glow appeared in his vision. Task 3, completed. Instantly, a rush of understanding pulsed through him, coursing from his heart. It was the same protective magic he'd woven around the Horcrux all those years ago, only now it served a new purpose. He gasped as the realization struck him full force. "The Resurrection Stone," he whispered in awe. "I know exactly where it is." For the first time in a long time, Harry Potter felt hope blaze back to life inside him. Harry stared at the Resurrection Stone in his hand, its pale glow mirrored in the creature before him. This mirror beast was no mere reflection. It was the very embodiment of Voldemort's protective magic around the Horcrux. Astonishingly, in the real world, that magic took the form of a lethal, intricately woven curse. Here, it had manifested as a living, terrifying guardian. Harry steeled himself and turned his full attention to understanding the enchantment. He knew that in reality, he could have blasted apart the ward guarding the Little Hangleton Horcrux with sheer destructive force. But this was different. The curse was as shifting and convoluted as a Rubik's Cube. Apply enough power, and it wouldn't collapse. It would simply transform into another banishment spell, sending the Horcrux rocketing away to some unknown, uninhabited place deep underground. Even Voldemort himself would not know where it landed. If that happened, the Horcrux would be lost forever. Harry refused to risk it. Taking a deep breath, he set himself to the task he'd hoped to avoid, unraveling the layers of this complex curse one by one, carefully and deliberately, until he could reach the Horcrux without triggering its escape clause. Harry shivered as he reflected on the most insidious trait of this curse. It tricks you into believing you've already broken it. The instant you touch the Horcrux, the heavy ring set with the Resurrection Stone, you feel its magic slither into your veins, scorching away your strength. Harry massaged his temples. This enchantment was maddeningly complex, far from static. It evolved in response to anyone who tried to undo it, a living spell that learned with every failed attempt. A moment later, a new entry blinked onto his task panel. Task 4, dispel the enchantment protecting the Horcrux. Note, the Horcrux, and with it the Resurrection Stone, cannot be claimed until this magic is fully unlocked. Harry stared at the words and let out a low whistle. He'd seen the blueprint for this curse, but that hardly made it any less daunting. Most spellbreakers' first challenge was not to tangle the enchantment further. Harry, however, already knew his path. He would have to channel every filament of his power with absolute precision, severing the curse in a single, unbroken motion. One slip, one hesitation, and the magic would twist itself anew. He drew a deep, steadying breath. This had to work. There would be no second chance. The pacing guide for Task 4 is explicit. As soon as Harry can write a 100-word essay on a single cube of tofu, pudding earns full credit. Using the cutting charm, His magical finesse should reach the level needed to undo the enchantments guarding a Horcrux. With that goal in mind, Harry sighed and resolved to push himself harder than ever. He stood in the center of the practice room, summoned a shallow pool of water, and waded in, concentrating on every ripple and shimmer. When he finally climbed out, dripping and exhilarated, he froze. Night had fallen long ago, and he'd been gone far too long. All around him, the air shimmered with quiet tension. The Weasleys clustered together. Sirius Black and Remus Lupin exchanged worried glances. Nymphadora Tonks hovered at the edge of the crowd, and far more solemn than Harry had ever seen him, Professor Dumbledore stood in front of the glass-paneled window. Before Harry could apologize, a chorus of voices rose at once. "Harry, did you really go into the mirror world? Which mirror did you use? You promised you'd never resort to that dangerous magic again. Harry, why didn't you take me with you?" Harry opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. All he could do was stare, pale and guilty. Thousands of miles away in the shadowed halls of Smith Castle, Ryan sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Kate," he said, eyes gleaming, "this is going to be far more entertaining than I thought." He waved a hand at the enchanted painting on the wall, and it rippled away like a disturbed pool of water, leaving only blank stone. "Watch," Ryan murmured. "The real battle is about to begin." Under the Lord God's command, Peter Pettigrew's soul was bound to the castle grounds, transformed into relentless beasts of burden that toiled ceaselessly to sustain the estate. "But you said the Phoenix incarnation was useless." Kate's eyes flew wide open. Ryan merely smiled, inscrutable and calm. Penelope caught his gaze and returned it with a knowing grin, clearly amused by the sudden exchange. Chapter 28. Harry Who Can't Lie. Ryan never imagined that watching Harry hit a stumbling block would wound him so badly. In theory, every logical voice in his head had warned him this would happen, but his divine side, his other self, paid no heed. It believed that Harry's struggles were exactly what would keep Ryan's humanity anchored throughout the endless years ahead. He ran a hand through his damp hair and swore under his breath. Turning to Kate and Penelope, he saw their eyes glittering with hunger, as if he'd just handed them a secret feast. Raising his hands in a placating gesture, he said, "Look, it isn't the Phoenix incarnation that's powerful, it's the wizard who wields it." Kate's lips curled in a predator's smile. Penelope leaned forward, eager for more. Ryan took a deep breath and plunged on. Harry never actually studied Phoenix incarnation magic. He simply borrowed the power of his own heart, and by sheer luck, performed a miracle. His approach is surprisingly straightforward. He fused his mother's magic of love with the Phoenix magic dwelling in his holly wand. Every encounter with Voldemort forged that bond deeper into his soul, until it became a part of him. And lately, he's honed it even further, using flesh-shaping spells to channel and refine that magic from within. Kate and Penelope exchanged a look, part challenge, part awe, but Ryan held their gaze. He knew that once they understood how Harry's true strength was born, no misconception could rob him of it. And in that moment of quiet confidence, Ryan felt his own resolve harden. He would stand by Harry, no matter how many times his friend fell and rose again. That Phoenix form Helbo created, it's nothing more than a temporary vessel for consciousness, a prosthesis designed purely for survival, Ryan said flatly. He didn't mention the subtle traits he'd absorbed from Harry's magic of love. That hidden element was the true reason Harry's power had evolved. By masking his real body behind a phantom phoenix and forcing the fight on two fronts, Harry had adopted a strategy that could only come from Ryan's own survival-driven mindset. Without Ryan's relentless practice and the improvements it brought, he would never have achieved that brief window of invincibility, or even made it to Hogwarts. Kate and Penelope exchanged a knowing glance. In Harry's tactics, they recognized Ryan's ruthless efficiency. Once Harry identified the Mirror Beast's weakness, he could have struck immediately with a burst of speed. Instead, he created a secondary self, a decoy, to draw the creature's full attention, then attacked with his true form from another angle. Even his final shout was a clever ruse. While the beast lunged toward the noise, Harry's real strike came from the shadows. That blend of deception and precision was the hallmark of Ryan's influence, and the hidden secret behind Harry's newfound strength. Kate scoffed. So what if he passes the test? Penelope rolled her eyes. Everyone could see Ryan was holding something back. Meanwhile, Harry, now surrounded by the others, dropped some startling news. He'd been gone so long this time that even Professor Dumbledore came looking for him. Under the worried gazes of a grim-faced Snape and Sirius Black, they reached a decisive verdict. Before Harry could return to Hogwarts, his wand would be confiscated. Severus Snape nodded approvingly. That's more like it. Mr. Potter may be a capable wizard, but even without the mirror, he'd probably find 100 ways back into that dangerous world. Sirius slammed his fist into an open palm. Harry, I think this is going too far. Even I agree with Snape on this one. Ron jumped in. Come on. You're just trying to keep me out of the fun. Mrs. Weasley shot her son an exasperated look. Ronald Weasley, this is far from a laughing matter. Albus Dumbledore's voice was quiet but unyielding as he looked down at Harry. I'm afraid I must break my promise to you. Harry's heart sank. He knew what was coming. He drew a steadying breath and met Dumbledore's gaze, resigned. All right, he said softly. I'll tell you where the Horcrux is, on one condition. He hesitated only a moment before launching into the story he had barely woven together himself. You've probably sensed it, Harry began. Ever since I fought that doppelganger version of me, I've felt the same dark pulse around Gringotts, throughout Diagon Alley, even over large parts of London. It was exactly like the moment I stood face to face with Voldemort's locket. He paused, steeling himself, then continued, and recently I've been plagued by dreams. I think the Horcrux can sense me, and I can sense it. His voice dropped to a whisper. Last night, when I was drifting off, I felt a pull from the window. A shadow formed in the glass, beckoning me. In that moment, I realized the Horcruxes aren't inert objects, they're creatures, mirror beasts living in some parallel realm. Dumbledore's brows knitted as Harry pressed on. They're born of reflection, like that living copy of me, and once they cross over, they gain flesh and power. I fought one of them in my room. It took everything I had, but in the end, I destroyed it. Dumbledore opened his mouth, but Harry held up a hand, urgency lacing his tone. Please believe me. If you take my wand, I won't be able to continue my next lesson. Nonverbal control is critical. I need it. Dumbledore studied Harry's earnest expression for a long moment before nodding. What he didn't know was that Harry's tale was only half true. The real reason he'd pinpointed the Horcrux so quickly was that during experimental trials of his new Phoenix form, he'd accidentally unleashed a blaze that ravaged most of London. But Harry intended to keep that secret, whatever the cost. Harry had always felt something off about Gringotts, but he'd never given it much thought. After all, Hagrid had assured him it was the second safest place in the wizarding world. Secrets and oddities were to be expected. Still, the mirror dimension he'd encountered before hinted at a deeper mystery. It wasn't until today, when he faced the so-called mirror beast at Little Hangleton, that he realized the truth. The creature was guarding one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Mirror beast? Charlie repeated, eyebrows raised. But you've got that Pluto dragon charm. Surely you could have dispatched it in an instant. Harry shook his head. That's the problem. If I'd simply summoned my dragon and swallowed it whole, I'd have learned nothing. The mirror beast is enchanted to conceal its secrets. Only by defeating it directly could I force it to reveal what it knew. Hagrid stepped closer, peering at the twisted shard of glass Harry held in his palm. And how did you even know a Horcrux was involved? Harry lifted the fragment, a warped, smoky lens that seemed to ripple with hidden images. I first sensed the Horcrux in Diagon Alley. When I finally destroyed the beast, it left this behind, a kind of crude information key. It pointed me here, to Gringotts, where the real Horcrux lies. Charlie exchanged a sober look with Hagrid. So that's why you took so long to bring down the mirror beast, he said quietly. Harry nodded, a chill tracing his spine despite the afternoon warmth. The next step in his quest loomed larger and more perilous than ever. Chapter 7, Reflections of Truth. The silence in Dumbledore's office was absolute as Harry finished recounting his ordeal. He had resisted the impulse to summon the Pluto dragon, despite knowing it would have easily vanquished the mirror beast, a creature every bit as terrifying as a thestral. Bound by the task's strictures, he'd lied about his failure rather than reveal the truth. Yet now, Standing before the headmaster, relief swept through him. At last someone was listening. Albus Dumbledore steepled his fingers and met Harry's gaze. Had you unleashed the dragon, you might have slain the beast, but you would have returned with nothing, a hollow victory. What matters is that you spoke honestly. Harry swallowed hard. He'd thought deception would buy him safety. Instead, it had only weighed on him. Professor McGonagall nodded solemnly. Meanwhile, we have another pressing concern, Tom Riddle's Horcrux. Its latest incarnation is evolving into something more dangerous than we anticipated. Mad-Eye Moody growled in agreement. It's decided then. We won't strip you of your wand. A disarmed Harry Potter is a sitting duck, especially if that mirror beast reemerges. Harry allowed himself a tentative smile. Dumbledore reached out, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. We'll see you through this, Harry. But first, we must locate the Horcrux. Which vault in Gringotts hides that fragment of darkness? A hush fell. The only response was the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock. And one more thing, Dumbledore added after a moment. We will not cross into the mirror world ourselves. To force the issue risks drawing more mirror beasts into our reality, or worse, birthing another malignant reflection. With that, the professors and aurors filed out in a hurry, each bound for new lines of inquiry. Their departure left Harry alone amid the rows of ancient books and the soft glow of the office lamps. Beyond the polished desk lay the unanswered questions. Where in Gringotts did the Horcrux wait? And what new horrors might the mirror's depths yet conceal? As the door clicked shut, Harry braced himself. The hunt had only just begun. Are you certain it's hidden in the Lestrange vault? Dumbledore asked, turning to Riddle. Riddle met his gaze. Yes, of all the Death Eaters, Voldemort trusts Bellatrix above anyone else. Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully. Riddle gave a curt nod in return, the weight of their task settling between them. Chapter 29. Gringotts Riddle leaned back in his chair, a thin smile curling at the corners of his mouth. You know she even took her husband's name, Lestrange. Bella raised an eyebrow. You mean Bellatrix? Precisely. You see, Voldemort always entrusted his Horcruxes to those he held in highest regard. The Malfoys received the diary. The Blacks were involved in testing the protective enchantments on the locket. Kreacher handled that task. And Bellatrix Lestrange, being among his most faithful, of course possessed one as well. Bella frowned thoughtfully. But why choose Gringotts? Isn't Hogwarts supposed to be the safest place in Britain? Riddle chuckled softly. Gringotts is second only to Hogwarts in security, and within it, the pure-blood vault is beyond even that. They would only deposit a Horcrux there if they feared imminent arrest. He paused, eyes glinting. Do you really want to retrieve it? Bella met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Gringotts Wizarding Bank, the sole wizarding bank in Britain, stood on the north side of Diagon Alley. Its gleaming white marble facade towered above the surrounding shops, the entrance facing the bustling thoroughfare. Gold griffin statues flanked the wide double doors, their polished beaks gleaming under the lantern light. Inside, goblin tellers bustled at their counters, the hush of whispered transactions filling the vaulted halls. Beyond the main foyer, secure corridors led to thousands of vaults, each protected by its own enchantments and guardians. At the very heart of this labyrinth lay the Lestrange family vault, home to one of Voldemort's most prized Horcruxes. Tonight, Bella Lestrange would face the greatest challenge of her life, breaking into the most secure vault in the wizarding world and confronting the evil it sheltered. Gringotts Wizarding Bank doesn't just safeguard the savings and heirlooms of witches and wizards, it's also the only place in Britain where you can trade Muggle money for wizarding coin. Operated entirely by goblins, any Muggle notes accepted are swiftly funneled back into the non-magical economy. Given that these same goblins once bested wizards in armed conflict, any scheme to break in for a handful of galleons is sheer madness, and the bank's fortress-like design only compounds its reputation for invulnerability. To reach the famed Marble Hall, visitors must breach two formidable doors. From Diagon Alley, a broad white stone staircase leads up to a bronze portal, watched over by a goblin in a scarlet tunic trimmed with gold studs. Once inside the first foyer, you pass through a second, silver door, flanked by another pair of goblin guards. Its face is embossed with the twin GG of Gringotts, and beneath the initials runs the bank's well-known admonition. Enter, all who dare, but be warned, misfortune, not fortune, may greet the uninvited. Beyond that final barrier lies the soaring, cavernous expanse of the Marble Hall, where a goblin's vigilance matches the grandeur of his bank. In the vast banking hall, hundreds of goblins perch on high stools behind a long row of marble counters. Some weigh coins on polished copper scales, others examine glittering gemstones through jewelers' eyepieces. Still more scrawl hurried entries into thick, leather-bound ledgers. Along the far wall, dozens of heavy doors stand ready to admit customers into private vaults. Beyond the grandeur of the main hall, a narrow stone corridor slopes steeply downward, its rough walls flickering in the light of mounted torches. Beneath your feet you hear the faint clatter of rails, for it is here that the bank's small, goblin-operated carts wait. Once aboard, you plunge into a maze of winding tunnels, the carts hurtling hundreds of feet beneath London's streets. The air grows cold and rushes past so fiercely that it stings the eyes and threatens to turn your stomach. At journey's end, you arrive before your vault. These chambers vary widely in both size and security. Near the surface, the vaults are modest affairs, sealed with simple locks and light wards. But deeper still, buried in the earth's very bowels, lie the vast strongholds of the oldest wizarding families. Their massive doors bristle with enchantments and runic seals, safeguarding treasures that mere mortals could scarcely imagine. Gringotts' innermost vaults were unlike any ordinary safe. The deeper you went, the more magic was required to open them. The outer chambers yielded to a simple key, but past a certain point, so the goblins whispered, only a goblin's own touch would unlock the door. Still farther below, the most secure vaults lay under the watchful guard of dragons. Now, deep underground and thousands of miles from London's familiar bustle, a tall, slender figure drifted silently into the vast marble hall that housed 4 or 5 of these legendary vaults. A lone dragon, its scales ghostly pale from centuries spent away from sunlight, lay coiled before one of the doors. Its pink-tinged eyes, clouded with age, barely registered the strangers that passed. Bound by iron stakes driven deep into the stone floor, its great barbed wings were folded neatly against its flanks, yet a single stretch of its neck, or a gout of dragonfire, would be enough to fell the unwary. Unfazed, the figure closed the remaining 6 feet to the vault door. There was no keyhole, no obvious means of entry at all, just cold, unyielding stone. With a smooth motion, the stranger drew a wand and tapped the surface. If any goblins had been standing guard, they would surely have dropped their ledgers in astonishment. Instead, the hall remained hushed as magic began to stir behind the ancient door. Because Gringotts itself is a massive, multi-layered magic circle, wizards cannot apparate into its vaults. Each stone door is bound to a specific goblin. Only when that goblin lays a hand on the door will it open. If anyone else, even a powerful wizard, tries to force it, they risk being torn apart by the vault's protective enchantments. Goblins routinely inspect the vaults every few decades, and as a result, odd, dried bones sometimes turn up among the piles of gold and jewels. Deeper still, at the heart of the bank, lies the dragon, a gigantic Ukrainian ironbelly whose sense of smell is as sharp as its fiery breath is deadly. No one approaches that vault save for its trained handler or the bearer of the proper golden key. To any other intruder, the beast is nothing short of a living storm of claws and flame. Yet the man standing before the vault's sealed door seemed to defy every warning. He had materialized here, bypassing the bank's warded barriers, and had strolled straight up to the dragon without so much as a backward glance. The colossal creature remained unperturbed, as if bound by some deeper charm to accept this stranger's presence. "It's fascinating, isn't it? The goblin's magic," he said, his voice warm with amusement. He flicked his wrist, and a slender beam of light traced an irregular, looping pattern in the air before the stone portal. With a low rumble, the door's runes flickered and died. The massive slab of enchanted rock dissolved like mist, revealing nothing but an empty space beyond. Where the vault door had stood, there was now a yawning void, an entrance wide enough to admit a handful of dwarves at once. And through that void lay whatever secrets Gringotts had guarded for centuries. But the stranger simply smiled, pocketed his wand, and stepped forward into the darkness. The cavern's chamber was packed from floor to ceiling with glittering treasure, piles of gold coins and gilded goblets, suits of polished silver armor, exotic furs, some lined with spines, others with downy wings, and rows of delicate potion vials. At its heart sat a crowned skull on a marble plinth, silent testimony to some long-forgotten ruler. To anyone else, this trove would have been intoxicating. The avaricious salivated at the coins, alchemists scoured the armors for hidden alloys, beastmasters plotted how to harness the creatures whose pelts and organs lay preserved, and scholars swooned before the rare elixirs shimmering in their glass. Yet the man beneath, Hood stood unmoved. Even the half of his face visible in the torchlight betrayed no hint of excitement. He strode calmly into the vault's depths. Behind him, with a dull metallic clang, the giant stone door slid back into place, sealing the entrance and plunging the horde into utter darkness. As expected, the man drew his slender wand and flicked it through the air. A perfect, luminous orb blossomed in the gloom, bathing the chamber in soft white light. With measured steps, he began a methodical search, examining each shelf, each alcove, each artifact, determined to uncover whatever secrets this hidden trove still kept. The fire spell flared to life and descended upon the vault's treasures, yet not a single coin melted or a gem cracked. He followed it with a replica charm, but still nothing happened. No shimmering clones, no bubbling reactions. Undeterred, the cloaked figure drifted among the endless piles of gold and jewels, his slender fingers trailing over each artifact in turn, probing for a flaw or a hidden enchantment. Minutes stretched on in perfect silent stasis. At last, a slow, satisfied smile curved his lips. He paused before a small, intricately engraved golden cup and hooked his fingers around its rim, lifting it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. In that instant, joy overcame caution. His hood slipped back, the cloak pooled at his shoulders, and candlelight revealed a face both handsome and severe, dark curls shadowing high cheekbones, cold eyes that gleamed with triumph. Tom Riddle, professor of defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, stood revealed. Author's note: thanks to Taishi Yumiksu for the monthly ticket, and to all my readers for your recommendations and subscriptions. Your support keeps the magic alive. Chapter 30. The reclaimed soul Riddle had felt many things in his unnaturally long life, but this sensation surpassed them all. Harry, now himself a living Horcrux, could never have known such a stirring within. Voldemort's greatest secret, his golden cup, lay cool and gleaming in Riddle's hand, and at the moment their surfaces met, something deep inside him stirred, awakened by a flood of alien memories. At first, the recollections arrived in fragments: the gentle laughter of a kindly woman, the rasping sigh of a scarred house elf, the soft footsteps of a brown-haired boy slipping through a candlelit kitchen. Then, as Riddle curled his slender fingers around one of the cup's delicate handles and lifted it from its satin cushion, the images coalesced into a vivid tapestry of the cup's past. He saw Hepzibah Smith, Helga Hufflepuff's proud descendant and the cup's last rightful owner. He felt her awe when she first beheld its ancient craftsmanship. He heard Hoki, the house elf, whisper her resentful fear at her mistress's obsession. And he shared the thrill of a young boy, hair tumbling into his eyes, who on one fateful night stole the cup from the Hogwarts kitchens, disobeying his mistress's strict command to keep it hidden forever. With each memory, a third presence within the Horcrux stretched and sighed, as though waking from a centuries-long slumber. Not Voldemort's warped soul, nor the fragment tied to Riddle himself, but an identity all its own, forged from every mind that had ever touched the golden vessel. Now, invigorated by those long-forgotten voices, it began to think, ready at last to reclaim its place in the world. Riddle peered at his other self and felt an unexpected emptiness settle in his chest. He hadn't realized how hollow he'd become until this moment. Just an hour ago, seated across from Dumbledore in the headmaster's office, the old wizard had looked at him with genuine concern. "Are you sure you want to reclaim your identity as the primary soul?" Dumbledore had asked softly. Without a hint of doubt, Riddle had replied, "It's the only way I can be whole again, stronger than Voldemort ever was." That decision had crystallized the instant he'd seen Harry Potter summon the Pluto dragon. The memory replayed itself relentlessly in his mind. Potter's determined gaze, the dragon's fiery roar, the very air crackling with raw power. In that moment, Riddle knew he had to move. Fortuitously, the information Harry uncovered about the Horcruxes just yesterday gave him the key he needed. By reasserting his human form and restoring himself as the principal soul, Riddle could transcend the fragmentary existence he'd endured. Now, standing before his reflection, he could finally measure his strength. At 17, he'd only glimpsed the depths of dark magic. Now he stood leagues beyond his former self. His deep dive into Muggle science and philosophy had sharpened his intellect and broadened his magical repertoire, and the transformation that followed his reunion with the main soul had endowed him with qualities no ordinary wizard, no matter how powerful, could claim. Reborn, Riddle felt the full force of his power thrumming through every vein. This was the true beginning of his ascendancy. Without those arduous magical transformations, and without any memories of his life as an adult, he found himself at a crossroads that only Voldemort and Dumbledore had ever occupied. He had once believed that by marrying the scientific principles he understood to arcane theory, knowledge Voldemort lacked, he could forge a weapon so devastating it would slay the Dark Lord and then allow him to settle into a quiet life of teaching. But watching Harry Potter's progress sent a chill through him. Yes, with patient research, he could incrementally boost the raw, destructive power of his spells. Yet on the deeper, more fundamental level, his breakthroughs remained frustratingly scarce. His hybrid approach of science and sorcery held promise, but it advanced far too slowly compared to Harry's astonishing growth. That realization changed everything. He began to turn his attention to Voldemort's Horcruxes. If Potter himself was a living Horcrux, then every other fragment of Voldemort's soul, trapped in an object, was not strength but weakness. Reclaiming those pieces, he reasoned, would shore up his power in ways that pure magical experimentation could not. Still, he refused to follow the only path to reunite a soul fragment with its master, as laid out in Advanced Dark Magic revealed. According to that text, the sole means of restoring a Horcrux was genuine repentance, an option he had no intention of pursuing. To truly reforge a Horcrux, one must relive the act of murder and feel it from the victim's perspective. In effect, you must excise the wounded fragment of your soul and force it back together perfectly. The agony of that process is said to be so intense it can shatter even the strongest mind. That is why Tom Riddle abandoned this method for restoring his soul, despite its completeness. Instead, he discovered an overlooked alternative, one born from Hogwarts' latest enchantment on its feasts. Since the food itself became subtly alive, ghosts throughout the castle began to regain faint blood color, no longer drifting through corridors in pure pearly white. Some even recovered small reserves of magic. Their power, however, was not what it had been in life. Each spell had to be invoked on demand, then drawn out by the food's animated aura or refined within Hogwarts' ever-present magical field. Even so, a dedicated circle of ghosts, once the very hands and feet of the magical world, took up study again, experimenting with this curious new force. It was among these restless spirits that Riddle found his inspiration for a soulless restoration, poking among their theories for that single spark of innovation. One of his most persistent companions in those dark investigations was the figure known only as the Fat Monk, a jovial specter whose forgotten lore proved more dangerous than any living wizard's. Hogwarts' gentle Hufflepuff ghost, known to students simply as the Fat Friar, was beloved for his kindness and good humor. Yet few realized that this cheerful spirit had once come within a hair's breadth of being elected pope. A devout scholar of the scriptures, he went on to invent a form of magic that wove sacred texts into occult practice, even delving into what most would call black magic. After all, he reasoned, the devil too is a servant of God. In Muggle lore, countless priests drive out demons simply by reciting the Bible. Some even command them outright. Tom Riddle, ever hungry for power, seized upon the Fat Friar's teachings and distilled them into a new rite he named the Holy Sacrifice. Its principle was startlingly simple. Treat your evil thoughts as literal demons and cast yourself in the role of Satan, the archetype of sin. You slay these demons by offering yourself as the ultimate sacrifice. Now, under flickering torchlight in a secluded chamber, Riddle prepared to enact the culmination of his new magic. Before him, An ornate golden chalice hovered above a stone pedestal. He raised his wand, and in a clear, resonant tone, began reciting an incantation in ancient Hebrew. I am Satan, enemy of God, lord of demons, the oldest serpent. I am sin incarnate, a fallen soul, and you shall serve me. As the final words left his lips, his wand traced an intricate pattern through the air. The chalice rose higher, suspended by unseen forces, while glowing runes spiraled into existence between its rim and Riddle's outstretched hand. In that charged silence, the dark ritual teetered on the brink of its terrifying conclusion. The runes, one by one, vanished into the gilded chalice, each absorption echoing with a ghostly chime. Riddle's voice cracked into a hoarse rasp, his sclera darkening until only black remained. Twin dragon horn illusions sprouted from his brow, and with a soft flutter of unseen wings, inky feathers drifted down onto the golden cup. From the chalice rim emerged a second riddle, an otherworldly duplicate with snow-white hair and eyes, like polished ivory, standing face to face with the horned, obsidian-eyed original. The cup slipped from his hand and clattered to the stone floor. At once, the pale riddle spread vast black wings. Dark flames curled across his flesh, igniting from his bare feet, licking upward until the fire crowned his head. Behind this phantom, a marble cross formed in midair, its surface gleaming like fresh snow. Golden chains shot out, binding him tightly to the marble pillar of judgment. Meanwhile, the real riddle fell silent, breaking off his incantation to draw in a deep, steady breath. As he inhaled, black flames coiled along his ribs, surged through his throat, and billowed from his nostrils and lips. The white-haired apparition began to waver, its form shimmering at the edges. The marble cross and its chains flickered with starlight, the tiny sparks lifting free. In a silent rush, those pinpoints of light spiraled toward the phantom's wings, merging into the dark plumage and setting each feather gleaming with cold, celestial fire. In that moment of convergence, chalice, runes, breaths of flame, and chains of starlight, the boundary between Riddle and his spectral twin grew ever thinner, teetering on the razor's edge of power and oblivion. Bathed in starlight, the dark wings of Riddle turned pure white. The cross and chain at his side dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the ghostly silhouette of his white-haired form. The true Riddle's breath faltered and then stilled, yet in the very instant he opened his eyes, both versions of himself merged into one. With that final union, the holy sacrifice was complete. Chapter 31. Jerry screams. Between mountains of gold and seas of silver, Riddle's black hair whipped wildly in the wind. Snow-white wings unfurled around his body, suffusing him with a pale, ethereal light. The glow rippled across his muscles, the darkness in his eyes receded to mere pupils. Even the phantom dragon horns on his brow vanished without a trace. Staring down at his slender, trembling fingers, Riddle marveled at the power coursing through him. His magic felt as pure as that of a unicorn, a holy creature. He could sense every vein of his blood brimming with life, even as the ancient curse that bound his soul writhed in response. A manic laugh burst from his lips, celebrating the unshakable unity of his spirit. And then, as the final flicker of light faded, calm washed over him. He lifted a golden goblet, snapped back his robes, and with a crackling surge of raw energy, vanished from sight. Thousands of miles away, Ryan was doubled over in pain, clutching his throbbing temples. Woo! 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 Jerry, the black cat, opened his blood-stained mouth and unleashed a piercing, guttural scream. Worse still, he wrapped his tail around Ryan's wrist in an unbreakable grip, refusing to let him forget the agony he'd inflicted. Kate collapsed onto the sofa, laughter bubbling out of her in waves. I told you she was doomed, you little brat. Letting Riddle keep that Horcrux was your biggest mistake. She shook with amusement, her eyes sparkling at the absurdity of it all. Penelope knelt beside Jerry, tenderly stroking the child's chubby cheeks. Poor thing, she murmured, rocking Jerry gently. We're just giving you a little extra nourishment. Nothing you can't handle. She glanced up at Ryan, who was lifting Jerry into his arms. Really, she looks even cuter now, don't you think? Ryan settled Jerry against his chest and inhaled deeply, as if savoring the moment. Yes, her body's strong enough to hold 2 Horcruxes. He paused, casting a sidelong glance at Penelope. If she were one of my own creations, she could carry 100. But remember, every Horcrux chips away at her personality. Too many, and we'll lose that sweetness. Penelope hesitated, studying Jerry's pale, silver-white eyes, which now mirrored Ryan's magical vision. Suddenly she frowned. Speaking of Riddle, I can't shake the image I saw when he first touched the Horcrux. It made him look like a unicorn. She shivered. And you know I've never much cared for unicorns. They exchanged a quiet laugh, watching as Jerry nestled against Ryan. Around them, the candlelight flickered on smooth walls, silent witnesses to the dangerous magic they were tampering with. For now, 2 Horcruxes seemed plenty, but with every choice came a price, and they all felt its weight. Kate shivered as the unicorn's flank brushed her robes, its silvery coat gleaming in the moonlight. She took an instinctive step back, eyes narrowing. Unicorns were all flash and pride, far more showy than most wizards let on, and if rumor was to be believed, astonishingly lustful. They only deigned to approach girls they deemed virginal and unspoiled. Penelope Clearwater discovered that the hard way in 3rd year. The herd had recoiled from her the moment she stepped into the clearing, uninterested in anyone whose body betrayed signs of maturity. Now, as another horned beast drifted closer to Kate, she couldn't help but remember Penelope's humiliation. Unicorns weren't born of nature alone, said Ryan from Kate's side, his voice low. They sprang from ceremonies much like this. Kate glanced at him. Ceremonies? I thought they were just wild creatures. Ryan's lips curved in a wry smile. Catholic doctrine teaches that every human is tainted by original sin. Some zealous wizards, foolish enough to believe every bit of that theology, devised rituals to purge their souls of negativity. From that desperate quest for purity, unicorns were born, sacred, immaculate, without a trace of corruption. But unicorn legends predate Christianity by centuries, Kate objected. Perhaps, Ryan admitted. The point is that when you toy with holy magic at its fringes, you're flirting with disaster. The most vicious curses often arise from these in-between spells, neither wholly divine nor entirely profane. He watched the unicorn's flaring nostrils. And unicorn blood, that's the worst of all. It looks pure as driven snow, but it carries a curse so deep it can warp your very soul. Ryan glanced away, shoulders sagging. His sigh had nothing to do with the unicorn. He was thinking of Harry's reckless choice in the second task, another toll paid for meddling with forces no one truly understands. Ryan watched, fascinated, as Harry took the unexpected path. He had accepted the bond of love rather than reject it. Ryan had been eager to see what twisted consequences that magic might unleash under extreme circumstances, and how Harry, now its willing master, would respond. Yet the moment he'd been longing for still hadn't arrived. Achoo! Harry's sneeze erupted through the flu connection, jarring Ryan out of his thoughts. On the other side of the country, Harry glanced down in dismay at the delicately molded pudding in his hand. The force of the sneeze had made his fingers tremble and sent the wand in his other hand wobbling, splitting the perfectly smooth dessert clean in half. Oops, Harry muttered, cheeks reddening. He cursed under his breath. He'd spent ages painstakingly inscribing Ginny's name across its surface, time and again, and now it lay wrecked. But Harry was nothing if not resourceful. With a sharp flick, he tapped his wand against the broken pudding. Reforto, he whispered, and the 2 ragged halves slid back together. The pudding's golden surface smoothed out, the repeated letters of Ginny gleaming as though nothing had happened. Ryan leaned back, a slow smile forming. Perhaps this was kinder than a spectacular disaster, but the game, he realized, was only just beginning. Harry frowned as Ron plopped a spoonful of pudding into his mouth. Okay, I thought you'd snuck off to the mirror realm behind my back again, he said, arms crossed. But this is going too far. Eating pudding without me? Ron swallowed in one gulp, then gaped. Wait, my pudding! He reached for the empty plate, then froze. Shh, keep your voice down. This room is full of mirrors. Harry's eyes darted around the chamber lined with polished glass. Right, mirrors. He cleared his throat. You said you were staying put. I was, Ron whispered, though his cheeks were smeared with chocolate. And I told you last time that I got caught by that mirror beast Horcrux thing, didn't I? Harry sighed and stood. He clamped a gentle hand on Ron's shoulder. Exactly. Adults still think you're the good kid. Don't go making things harder for them. Ron shrugged off the hand and wiped his chin. So what's the condition? Harry rolled his eyes. Just promise me you won't slip into another mirror world without filling me in first. Deal. Ron flashed a grin. Not bad, Harry. I like that idea. As expected of my brilliant big brother, Harry teased, elbowing him lightly. Couldn't have done better myself, Ron crowed, puffing up with pride. Harry laughed, bumping shoulders with him. Our friendship's like the golden snitch to galleons, absolutely priceless. Ron held open the door. After you, mate. Together, they stepped out, leaving the mirrors and pudding crumbs behind. What are you doing? Harry's voice was tense. I almost forgot, Ron said offhandedly. Harry raised an eyebrow. Well? Ron's grin turned mischievous. Promise me one thing. Take me into the mirror world, and I'll help however I can. He threw his arm over Harry's shoulder, gave a mock thumbs up, and nodded toward the door behind them. So, shall we? Harry recoiled. It's not that simple. Ron shrugged. I'm sure Mrs. Weasley and the others will believe either of us. Harry's jaw went stiff. Ron was entirely unreliable, and the mirror world was no place for half measures. That realm reacted violently to visitors from our world. Without first merging with his own shadow in the mirror, or world, Ron risked unleashing his darker self and inviting every mirror beast within sight to swamp him through polished surfaces. Harry remembered his own first excursion. His shadow side had grown so powerful that even his aura, capable of summoning the Pluto dragon, warned most mirror creatures to keep their distance. He massaged his temples. You can't just walk in there unprepared. You'll get yourself killed. Ron's grin faltered as Harry's warning hung in the air. You lied. Harry's words came out sharp and low. Ron lifted his chin, eyes gleaming with triumph. You said the mirror beasts remember you and wouldn't dare come near, but that other story of yours, he let the sentence hang, then laughed. That was a Horcrux. Harry stared at him in disbelief. A piece of Voldemort, afraid of me? His voice cracked with anger. In the silence that followed, Harry's mind raced, and then he understood. It wasn't magic or bravery that kept the beasts at bay. It was the resurrection stone. Harry finally put an end to Ron's protests, on one condition. Ron would accompany him to Diagon Alley via the Mirror of Erised. Diagon Alley was the pulsating heart of the magical world in London, a twisting lane of shops clustered around Ollivander's Wand Emporium, the oldest wand shop in recorded history, founded in the 4th century BC. Even in years past, Harry and Ron had found themselves drawn there. Now, however, the alley had undergone a transformation that surpassed their wildest dreams. To the Muggle parents who first guided their wide-eyed children down its cobblestone thoroughfare, Diagon Alley had seemed like a portal to a bygone era, its medieval facades and venerable magic preserved unchanged. Today, though, it gleamed like a city of the future. Enchanted contraptions, some modeling familiar Muggle devices, had become common modes of conveyance, and every shopfront shimmered with spells of unprecedented sophistication. Dominating the skyline was the new Skywalker Alchemy Workshop, its cloud-like turrets and floating walkways, the vision of the recently established Walker Construction Company. Its daring design had sparked a renovation spree, with every other merchant racing to modernize their own storefronts. None of these innovations were on Harry and Ron's radar. They hadn't set foot in Diagon Alley since last summer's holiday. As they stepped through the mirror's enchanted frame, neither of them suspected just how dramatically the alley's ancient magic had been reinvented. While Ginny was at Luna's house, Bill and Charlie were settling into their new positions abroad. Mrs. Weasley lounged in the parlor, humming old songs. Percy buried himself in ministry reports. Fred and George schemed their next big prank, and Mr. Weasley was once again working late into the night. Amid all that familiar Weasley bustle, Harry spotted a quiet moment. He grabbed Ron's hand and led him to the dining room table, where a single porcelain flue plate lay ready. Together they stepped onto its surface. Darkness swallowed them instantly, and the world spun in a blur of countless heaps of soot-streaked doors. Harry steadied himself, murmuring the words Diagon Alley, and the swirl of flames and shadow vanished. They emerged with a soft thud against a wall so smooth and gleaming it might have been glass. Ron reached out to touch it, and recoiled in surprise when his hand met cold, solid stone. Whoa! This is way cooler than the Floo network, Ron exclaimed, pressing his palm flat against the polished surface and staring at his reflection. Harry ran his fingers along the wall's edge. It's stone enchanted to look like glass. Must be one of Walker Construction's new composites. All around them, Diagon Alley teemed with its usual wonders, crooked shop fronts bristling with curiosities, enchanted cobblestones that gave ever so slightly underfoot, and even a bathtub floating serenely overhead. In the distance, the pale marble towers of Gringotts gleamed against the sky. Ron let out a delighted laugh. They really were back, and it felt every bit as magical as ever. Harry barely had time to mull over his thoughts before Ron's voice cut in. "This is Florin's ice cream shop." They backed up together, peering at the unexpected fortress of stone. Thick walls surrounded the building, something Harry was certain hadn't been there on his last visit to Diagon Alley. Before he could puzzle it out, Ron grabbed his sleeve and stepped forward. As they approached the wall's center, a soft shimmer appeared in midair, like words forming from mist. Florin's ice cream shop. Without hesitation, Ron walked through, and Harry followed. On the other side, they emerged into a bright courtyard, each clutching a carton of ice cream. Harry's choice was his favorite. Rich chocolate swirled with raspberries and sprinkled with crushed nuts. He took a grateful spoonful. "So, where to next?" he asked around a mouthful. Ron pointed. "See that tree over there? That's the magical creatures shop, perfectly grown into the trunk. And floating above us," he added, nodding skyward, "is Eeyore's Owl Emporium. Its stone wings flutter non-stop. Across the way, that draped stone facade belongs to Madame Malkin's robe shop." Harry smiled, savoring both the ice cream and the wonder of it all. Diagon Alley had never looked more magical. Harry and Ron strolled down Diagon Alley, taking in the dazzling transformations. The Partridge Cauldron shop glowed with panels of some unfamiliar metal, and Cody and Bean's Mo Quidditch Supplies had remodeled its facade to look like the dimpled leather of a quaffle. Everywhere they looked, shopkeepers had seized the chance to reinvent their storefronts, except, curiously, for two notable exceptions. "But why haven't the Leaky Cauldron or Gringotts changed at all?" Ron asked, eyebrows knit in confusion. Harry gave it a moment's thought. "The Leaky Cauldron still serves as our connection to the Muggle world. It can't be altered without drawing notice. And Gringotts, well, they're the backbone of wizarding finances. Regulations alone keep its vaults and its facade exactly as they've always been." Suddenly, Harry's face brightened. "That's it! Come on!" He seized Ron's arm and hurried toward the far end of the street. 10 minutes later, they halted before Ollivander's wand shop. The dark wood and gabled roof looked just as Harry remembered, and the gold-lettered sign overhead had begun to flake, revealing minute cracks of age. Of course, Ollivander's would remain unchanged. Wand-makers thrived on tradition, and nothing spoke more of tradition than a door that creaked under your hand and a sign that had weathered centuries. Yet what truly surprised Harry was the crowd pressed against the windows and spilling onto the sidewalk. Though term wouldn't begin for weeks, dozens of witches and wizards, many with somber expressions, stood in hushed awe before the shopfront. They leaned forward, desperate for one last look at the familiar golden letters as they peeled at the corners. Ron, by contrast, couldn't decide how to feel. One moment his eyes shone with excitement, the next his shoulders drooped under a sudden wave of nostalgia. He peered at the sign, then at Harry, then back at the sign again, emotions flickering across his face like sunlight dancing on water. Harry nodded. In a world suddenly brimming with change, here was a reminder that some things, certainly the best things, were meant to stay the same. Harry and Ron had just pushed through the crowd outside Ollivander's when Ron gave Harry a sharp nudge. "Harry, who's that?" he whispered, nodding toward the doorway's peeling gold-lettered sign. Harry followed his gaze and froze. Inside the wand shop stood Argus Filch. Worse, he wasn't alone. Beside him was a dark-skinned witch with large, fish-like eyes, laughing as she slipped her elbow around Filch's waist. "My goodness," Ron breathed. "There's no Mrs. Norris in sight, and Filch actually looks alive and popular with witches, apparently." Indeed, Filch's usual hunch was gone. His thinning hair appeared thick and glossy, and he carried himself with an energy Harry had never seen in the school's cantankerous caretaker. It was as though some spell had breathed new life into him. "Hasn't he even bought a wand yet?" Ron muttered, still staring. Before Harry could answer, a small, rotund wizard at their elbow cleared his throat. He looked so awkward among the throng, as if he'd spent years hiding from crowds, that he didn't even recognize two of the school's most famous pupils. "Ahem?" the little man said, peering at them uncertainly over his spectacles. Excuse me, could you tell me where the line for Ollivanders ends? He's the great Argus Filch, the only person ever brave enough or foolish enough to apply as Hogwarts caretaker when he's a squib. And Miss Campbell, too, another remarkable squib who's made a place for herself in the wizarding world. They're a perfect match. Any comments? Demanded the short, pudgy wizard, his cheeks reddening as he forced out the words. So they're both squibs, then? Ron Weasley shot back, his tone more insult than question. Ron. Harry Potter jabbed him sharply, hoping to shut him up, but Ron completely misread the prod as an invitation to explore and strode into the shop without a second glance at the wizard's outraged cries. We're wolf wizards, the rotund man continued at full volume. Far stronger than you skinny-armed, feeble-wristed spellcasters. You're just a bunch of lucky bastards. His shrill proclamation drew a small crowd of former squibs, their indignation flaring. Had there not been other wizards on hand to intervene, Professor Quirrell and Ron would soon have found themselves surrounded, and very likely taught a harsh lesson. Chapter 33, Magic Drama Academy. Chapter 476, School of Magic and Drama. Harry pulled his shoulders up around his neck as he squeezed through the crowd outside Ollivander's wand shop, determined to keep his chin raised. He had planned to hang back until Argus Filch and his companions drifted off, but Ron's curiosity got the better of him. Before Harry could argue, Ron strode straight through the door. The sudden jingle of the bell above the door cut through the muffled bustle, and 3 sharp pairs of eyes fixed on them from behind the counter. Filch's face contorted into a tight, sour grin. Another one, he muttered. Harry braced for a blast of Filch's usual ugliness, but Ron was already firing back. Harry Potter, are you here to ask stupid questions again? Filch snarled. My questions are important, Ron shot back without missing a beat. Then, flicking a look at the woman standing beside Filch, he added, Or are you going to tell me you're a squib too? The woman, dark-skinned, with bright, curious eyes and a finely carved wand in her hand, smiled warmly. Technically, I was a squib once, she said, her voice light, but not anymore. She twirled her wand between her fingers and turned to Ron. So, Mr. Weasley, how's our dear caretaker getting on with his duties at Hogwarts? Still chasing Peeves around the corridors, I suppose. Ron blinked, taken aback by her friendly tone. Harry stood frozen, absorbing the scene. Filch's perpetual scowl, Ron's unexpected boldness, and this surprisingly talkative Miss Campbell, who seemed utterly at ease bantering with the cranky caretaker. As he watched Filch tolerate her chatter, laughing even on rare occasions, Harry realized why Mrs. Campbell had become a fixture at the shop. Filch's bad temper simply couldn't chase her away, and if she wielded her wand half as expertly as she wielded conversation, no wonder Ollivanders valued her so highly. She was as unabashed and shameless as Ron himself. Wait, are you Wayne Campbell? Both your parents are wizards? Ron's eyes went wide. Wayne simply nodded. Then you're 100 times better than Filch. He's just a squib from the Roll family. He probably only got into Hogwarts because of his family's connections. Ron folded his arms, smirking. I think you deserve a better start. Ron rarely praised anyone, so by his standards, this really was a compliment. Filch, looming nearby, displayed an odd mix of gratitude and indignation. It seemed he'd begun to like Wayne, against his own grumbling nature. But as soon as Ron turned his attention back to mocking Filch, the caretaker couldn't hold it in. I'm right here, Ron Weasley, Filch barked. Ron blinked, as if he'd just woken from a daydream. You are? He rubbed his eyes and looked around, confused. Harry stared at him, speechless. Ron had completely forgotten Filch was standing just a few feet away. I nearly forgot, Ron muttered. Once I've got my wand, I'm heading off to school with... He trailed off, eyes locked on Filch. Harry and Ron both gaped. What? Ron finally managed. You, going to magic school? Hogwarts? You? Harry echoed, incredulous. Hogwarts? Because squibs rarely or ever attended Hogwarts, especially when normal students were off on their summer holidays, the idea seemed utterly impossible. Yet there Filch stood, the unlikeliest Hogwarts hopeful of them all. Harry paused mid-thought, eyes narrowing as a familiar image flickered through his mind. Argus Filch, wearing a bizarre student uniform, hunched over a cauldron, furiously mixing potions, while Professor Snape barked orders at him. It had been ridiculous. And it wasn't Hogwarts. How can people like us even get into Hogwarts? Harry muttered under his breath. Filch's face fell, hurt flashing in his beady eyes. Harry, do you have to be so rude? Ron, standing beside him, tut-tutted. Honestly, Harry, stop being so blunt. Me? Rude? Harry blinked, taken aback, especially coming from Ron. He shook his head. We're not really going to Hogwarts at all. We're enrolling in the School of Magic and Drama. Ron's eyebrows shot up. The School of Magic and Drama? What's that supposed to be? Some sort of cult? From across the courtyard, Miss Campbell approached with a warm smile, the dimple at her left cheek deepening as she joined the conversation. Not a cult, she said gently. It's a legitimate academy for adult wizards who don't exactly fit the traditional mold. You mean like squibs who suddenly, well, aren't squibs anymore? Harry prompted. Miss Campbell nodded. Exactly. Until recently, squibs had no place at Hogwarts, but our school specializes in educating every kind of magic user, especially those who, like you, were once powerless. Ron crossed his arms. It sounds too good to be true. There have been so many scams, those quick spell correspondence courses that charge a fortune and teach nothing but parlor tricks. They prey on wealthy squibs without any wizarding connections. I know the rumors, Miss Campbell admitted, which is why we're so transparent. Our faculty includes former Hogwarts professors, some even retired from the headmistress's office. We hold classes in fully equipped labs, we publish our curriculum openly, and students who complete the program receive diplomas recognized by the ministry. Filch shifted his weight, suddenly interested. You mean it's real? Completely, Miss Campbell replied, her eyes sincere. We've already graduated 2 cohorts. They've gone on to work in magical law enforcement and the Department of Mysteries. Harry exchanged a glance with Ron. The memory of Snape's scolding faded. Here was a chance, not only to learn proper magic, but to belong somewhere. He let out a slow breath. All right, let's see what this School of Magic and Drama can really do. Miss Campbell beamed. Welcome, then. Your first potions lesson starts in an hour. No dark cauldrons, I promise. She paused, teasing, unless you'd prefer to mix something explosive. Harry couldn't help but grin. Finally, he thought, something that felt like the real deal. Magical novices are all too easy to fool, and once they've been duped, they have no real way to defend themselves. The Quick Spell course is a perfect example. Its instructor advertises lightning-fast incantations, yet his only success story is a hapless housewife whose potions repeatedly exploded, earning her the mocking nickname, the Annoying Lady of Mount Apex. Miss Campbell, you mentioned the School of Magic and Drama, Hermione said, peering at the colorful brochure. At that moment, Filch, smoothing his robes with exaggerated pride, stepped forward. Oh, it's a first-rate institution, accepting students from every corner of the globe. No geographic restrictions at all. He flashed a silver badge edged in gold. Harry recognized the emblem instantly. Ron merely blinked. Quietly, Harry explained, that's the International Confederation of Wizards seal for approved vocational schools. Think of it like a technical college in the Muggle world. Ron turned to Miss Campbell. So adding a major is like choosing a trade? Exactly, she confirmed. Hogwarts offers a broad classical education. This school lets you specialize. Performance magic, theatrical illusions, practical enchantments, so you graduate with specific, marketable skills. Ron considered this, arms folded. Hermione exchanged a glance with Harry, and both felt, in a world full of charlatans, specialized training might be the best protection of all. Miss Campbell smiled at Harry and Ron as they lingered in Ollivander's wand shop. Our academy doesn't focus primarily on magical theory, she began. Instead, we teach the technological skills that power the factories of the wizarding world. If you excel here, you can even join one of our partner firms as soon as you graduate. Filch leaned forward, emphasizing her point. Take Charlie Candy Company, famous for its chocolate frogs. William Pharmaceuticals, which has just broken into the low-end potion market, and the Nimbus Racing Broom Company. All 3 maintain formal partnerships with the School of Magic and Drama, and their eager are to hire outstanding graduates. Ron opened his mouth to ask another question, but a sudden clatter on the stone floor drew their attention. Ollivander glided into the shop on his wheeled stool, his wand trunk rattling behind him. Filch stiffened, casting a dark glance at the wandmaker before sidling toward the exit. Miss Campbell gave Ron a quick nod. a silent promise to reply to any further questions by Owl, then slipped out after Filch. Ollivander stopped beside Harry and Ron, pushing his half-moon spectacles up his nose. "Good afternoon, Mr. Potter. Mr. Weasley," he greeted in his lilting voice. "What have I interrupted?" Ron crossed his arms and let out a huff. "I was staring right at the doorway, waiting for you to show up," he said bluntly. "You always pop in when we least expect it." Harry had to admit, Mr. Ollivander had a knack for sneaking up behind people and giving them a start. The wandmaker fixed Harry with a piercing gaze and spoke softly. "Harry Potter, Hollywood, Phoenix Feather Core, 11 inches, very supple. I read in the Daily Prophet what you accomplished with one of my wands. Excellent work. I'm certain you'll do great things." He fell silent for a moment, likely because Ron was standing nearby. Ollivander chose not to mention the twin Holly wand in his collection. Instead, he turned to Ron and said, 14 inches, willow wood, unicorn hair core. It's not like an ordinary willow wand. It makes no soft swish when you wave it." Harry let out a quiet sigh of relief. The last thing he wanted was to hear the same appraisal of his mother's wand. 10¼ inches, willow, swishes when waved, a fine wand for magic, which would have felt terribly anticlimactic. Gathering his courage, Harry cleared his throat. "Well then, what about me? Surely you've heard of my exploits." Before Ollivander could answer, Ron piped up indignantly. "The invisible beast in Ravenclaw Tower, guarding the Philosopher's Stone, and let's not forget my latest masterpiece, the smoke bomb." He bristled, arms folded, as if expecting immediate acknowledgement. Chapter 34. Similar Flowers. Some people boast so relentlessly that they end up believing their own stories. Ron Weasley is one of them. The tall tale he kept repeating, that an invisible beast lurked in Ravenclaw Tower, actually sprang from a different, much older rumor, that a phoenix haunted the Ravenclaw common room. Before any of them even set foot at Hogwarts, students had whispered of strange phoenixes drifting through the tower's corridors. When Ron was caught smuggling Norbert up to the astronomy tower, he saw his chance. He invented a new legend. This reclusive phoenix lived in solitude near the astronomy tower, protected by an invisible guardian creature, and both were targets for senior poachers who dreamed of capturing them. With Draco Malfoy's quiet cooperation, Ron spread the story so persistently that it hardened into fact. Underclassmen began checking the tower's ledges for signs of wings or shadows, repeating the myth as though they'd seen it themselves. Eventually, even Mr. Ollivander believed it. "That's entirely possible," Ollivander said, stroking his chin. "If that phoenix still roosts in the tower, I might be able to procure some fresh phoenix feather for wand cores." He shook his head at the thought of such good fortune slipping through his fingers, much to Ron's dismay. Harry's mind raced as he stood amid the neat rows of wand boxes in Ollivander's shop. If Ravenclaw really did breed phoenixes, as the latest rumor claimed, he'd stumbled on a remarkable new source of wand cores, far more interesting than always relying on Fawkes. In fact, couldn't Dumbledore be deliberately keeping Fawkes's feathers exclusive, simply to maintain demand? After all, some whispered that the Order of the Phoenix was funded, in part, by sales of those very feathers. The irony wasn't lost on Harry. Perhaps that was the true meaning behind the Order's name. "Sir," Harry said, turning to Ollivander and ignoring Ron's puzzled look, "have you been making any phoenix feather wands recently?" Ollivander blinked, as if woken from a trance. He peered at Harry over his half-moon spectacles. "Actually, Mr. Potter, you might not know this, but every phoenix feather I've used since I began crafting wands has come from Fawkes, Professor Dumbledore's phoenix." Harry's ears pricked up at the confirmation. Ollivander continued, "And of all those Fawkes feather wands, only 2 have ever been sold. The others you've heard about are simply part of my old inventory, made long ago and never claimed." Harry felt a quiet thrill. A whole new world of wand possibilities might lie waiting in Ravenclaw Tower, and Dumbledore's monopoly on phoenix feathers could soon end. Mr. Ollivander swept his hand across the line of wand boxes, as if unveiling a family portrait. "All of these," he said quietly, "are heirlooms. Materials gathered by my ancestors in the days when phoenixes still nested in the remote highlands. Those tail feathers were carefully collected long before Muggle towns grew and drove the birds away. Once a phoenix's habitat was discovered by Muggles, the creatures simply moved on, and my father's generation lost every source of phoenix plumage. He sighed, his pale eyes distant. When I inherited this shop, I feared I would never again craft a single wand with genuine phoenix feathers. Then, of course, Professor Dumbledore arrived with Fawkes at his side, and hope returned. Just recently, I believed I was on the verge of securing a new supply of feathers, but his voice trailed off, as though touching a still sensitive memory. Ron leaned closer, tapping a slender wand box. So when you reordered this time, did you make any sibling wands to Harry's? Wands from the same batch of feathers? Ollivander shook his head. No, only 2 wands were ever made from that particular clutch of Fawkes's tail feathers, Harry's wand, and another I sold many years ago. Harry looked puzzled. But all these wands in here also contain Fawkes's feathers, don't they? Yes, the wandmaker replied, but not from the same group of feathers. Even within a bird's tail, each feather is unique in its growth, its magic. Those earlier 2 wands share the same origins, colors, and vitality, but these newer ones come from different quills. Their temperaments will vary. Ron grinned. So Harry really did get a one-of-a-kind wand after all. Harry allowed himself a small smile, resting his hand on his own wand, once again reassured of how special it truly was. Chapter 7. The Nature of the Phoenix. Ollivander reached behind his desk and carefully drew out a small, velvet-lined box. He opened it to reveal 2 brilliant feathers, each aglow with the fiery colors of a phoenix. You all know that a phoenix is said to be immortal, he began, reborn from the ashes when its life cycle ends, but you may not realize that each rebirth brings change. He lifted the first feather. It was a deep, sunset red, its barbs sturdy and straight. Then he held up the second, a glowing orange gold, its strands more slender and gently curved. Harry leaned forward, puzzled. They're clearly different, Harry said. They can't be from the same bird. Precisely, Ollivander agreed, placing the feathers side by side. Yet they are, from the same phoenix, only from different rebirths. Every time it goes through that final conflagration and rises again, its form shifts, even its plumage changes. Harry studied the feathers. So the bird that emerges after each cycle isn't identical to its predecessor. Exactly, Ollivander continued, tucking one plume back into the box. Perhaps this is how the phoenix maintains a consistent temperament across lifetimes. Its appearance adapts, but its spirit, its essence, remains intact. Then is the phoenix truly immortal? Harry asked, brows drawn together. Ollivander paused as he closed the box. What if, rather than a single creature living forever, each new phoenix is actually the offspring of the last, born from its ashes, inheriting its memories? Harry's eyes widened. So the bird reborn in the flames isn't the same individual, but its child, with all the memories passed down. The wandmaker nodded slowly, gazing at the box as though he could already glimpse the next generation of feathers within. If that's the case, true immortality may be nothing more than a precious legacy, a chain of descendants carrying forward one unbroken soul. He slid the box into the drawer and settled back into his chair. The quiet click of the hatch was the only sound as Harry absorbed this unsettling possibility, that the phoenix survives not by living forever, but by bequeathing its life and its memories to the next. Harry frowned as Mr. Ollivander tucked the vial back into its drawer. Why hide it so quickly? He asked. You might inquire with Professor Dumbledore, Ollivander replied with a faint smile. He's the foremost authority on phoenixes in our world. Harry exchanged a puzzled glance with Ron. Then why did you put the feather away? It looks identical to the one we examined. Ollivander's eyes twinkled behind his spectacles. Exactly why I couldn't praise it when I sold Mr. Weasley his first wand. He gave Ron a playful wink. Sometimes, something that seems the same at first glance conceals its true value. Ron huffed in irritation. But the color, the shape, it's the same feather. Across the ocean, in a sunlit laboratory in California, Ryan watched the scene unfold on his monitor. As the trio at Ollivander's debated the feather's merits, Ryan's feed cut to a roaring furnace where phoenix quills curled into flames. Those very plumes had come straight from Ollivander's shop, plumes the old wandmaker had long lamented were in short supply. Suddenly, it all made sense. Ollivander wasn't simply hoarding feathers. He needed fresh cores to craft wands that buyers actually wanted. The recycled feathers he'd used before had left him with unsellable stock. Ryan leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly. The wizarding world truly overflows with hidden talents, he murmured. He'd always pegged Ollivander as a master craftsman, gifted but hardly exceptional outside his workshop. Yet here was proof that the wandmaker had tapped into something remarkably close to a phoenix's gift of rebirth, and kept it all to himself. Meanwhile, Harry's suggestion that Dumbledore held every key to Phoenix lore rang hollow. It seemed even the greatest wizards had secrets, and Ollivander's might be the most surprising of all. He was the only wizard in the magical world who truly understood the Phoenix, and not in the half-cooked way Harry had, with his strange makeshift Phoenix form. Ryan, by contrast, had seamlessly fused his own ever-renewing power with the Phoenix's essence, transforming himself into something more than human, a genuine, living Phoenix. In doing so, he claimed the creature's ultimate gift, true immortality. Phoenixes endure by birthing successive selves in a cycle of fiery nirvanas. With each rebirth, the Phoenix's soul shifts ever so slightly, as though the world itself has begun anew. Yet no outward change marks these transformations. Its form, memories, and core personality remain unbroken from first to last. In effect, a phoenix is an ageless being who rides the currents of time, hidden behind the official records of its own descendants. Ryan, however, took a bolder path to eternity. He purged every trace of his own identity, his birth certificate, his social history, every digital and magical record, erasing Ryan Smith entirely from the world's ledgers. To mortal eyes and to the laws of both men and magic, he simply never existed. And yet, with a gesture of his will, he can conjure flawless new documents, lending any persona the weight of long-established legitimacy. In the eyes of heaven and earth alike, the immortal Ryan Smith has never walked their realms. And yet he lives on, reborn time and again, not as a man, but as the undying flame of the Phoenix itself. Although they share the same name and appearance, there is no blood tie between them. In this world, they're like identical blossoms, each one unfurling in turn, beautiful, yet entirely separate from the rest. Chapter 35, Phoenix Incarnation Plus Edition. The noonday sun beat down mercilessly on the earth, yet within the stone walls of Nottingham Forest Castle, no one sought refuge in shaded galleries or beneath leafy boughs. Instead, two women were seated amid blazing braziers, fiery plumes of phoenix feathers crackling all around them. 8 of these braziers lined the great hall, each one burning with an unearthly ruby-red glow. One of the women was tall and willowy, the other short and stout. Beyond their starkly contrasting figures, they shared only one feature: skin as pale and unblemished as freshly fallen snow, not a bead of sweat marring their composure. It was as though they sat inside a cold storage vault or a Muggle air-conditioned chamber, rather than beside roaring flames. They might have remained motionless within those embers forever, had a single, clear male voice not interrupted their trance. "Kate, Penelope," the voice rang out, rich and confident. "I've just had an idea. Why not practice using feathers from the same batch?" At that, both women blinked and turned toward the speaker, who strode forward into the flickering light. He looked as if he'd stepped from the marble of some ancient Greek sculpture, strong jawline, exquisitely carved features, and eyes bright with enthusiasm. "After all," he continued, "you're a team, not lone combatants. Synchronizing your feathers could yield far better results than working separately." The two women rose from their braziers, red-hot quills falling away like spent firework embers. Kate, the taller of the pair, gave a slight nod. Penelope, her portly counterpart, managed a determined smile. Together they stepped out of the blazing circle and prepared to test this new challenge, side by side. Ryan hovered above them, sitting cross-legged on an invisible platform, casually drawing in the fragrant smoke that rose from the blazing furnace beneath him. The way he inhaled reminded Kate and Penelope of someone smoking a leisurely cigarette, except this smoke was made of living phoenix feathers. "Little brat," Kate barked, stamping her foot in frustration. "I finally calmed down, and now look at you, just wasting time." Ryan flicked a wry smile. "We're wasting nothing." He blew a slow exhale. "Every wisp of this smoke holds power. You should be using it to refine your phoenix incarnation." Kate threw up her hands. "But won't inhaling the fumes from different phoenix feathers, well, according to you, boost our incarnation proficiency?" She glared at him, suspicion mixed with impatience. Penelope, more composed, leaned forward. What do you mean by different feathers? Aren't they all the same? Nirvana lineage? With a graceful gesture, Ryan drifted through the air and landed between the 8 gleaming furnaces that surrounded the women. His gray robe billowed as he spoke. I just learned from Ollivander that although these furnaces burn the same phoenix feathers, they come from distinct batches. The batch you train with can influence how easily you enter phoenix incarnation. At his command, the 8 silver chambers snapped shut. The flames died down, and the remaining feathers, still glowing like molten rubies, melted into a liquid radiance. The fiery nectar slid through cracks in the furnaces and streamed toward Ryan, disappearing into him in a single, brilliant blaze. Kate and Penelope exchanged startled looks. If the batch truly made a difference, their path to mastering the phoenix incarnation had just grown infinitely more complex. Ryan was confident he'd covered every detail. After all, he'd even injected Kate and Penelope with his own vital essence, by far the most potent alchemical catalyst for bodily transformation. With the humanoid phoenix he'd summoned as their guide, the phoenix incarnation should have awakened almost at once. Yet, to his surprise, both women still struggled to activate the spell. He'd forgotten one crucial point. He'd taught them not the basic phoenix incarnation, but his latest, heavily refined iteration. This advanced ritual dispensed with the archaic requirement to recite long poetic hymns in praise of the phoenix. It conferred true phoenix magic, granting practitioners the ability to shift into a blazing avian form in mere moments. While it fell short of granting literal immortality, a sufficiently powerful wizard could, in time, leverage its energies to prolong life indefinitely. Despite their prodigious talent, and despite downing vial after vial of Ryan's vital serum, Kate and Penelope still couldn't spark the incarnation. They sat in the circular hall, bathed in the warm glow emanating from the phoenix-shaped effigy at its center, their brows furrowed in frustration. Every attempt fizzled before it could ignite. Even Harry's best elixir, by comparison, was like an ant standing beside an elephant when measured against Ryan's blood. Ryan sighed. It was a bitter reminder that no matter how powerful the catalyst, true mastery demanded more than raw potency. If Kate and Penelope were to succeed, he would first have to guide them through the missing leaps in their understanding and rediscover the patience he'd so cavalierly abandoned. Fleur had mastered her Vila heritage so completely that she could wield her charms at will. Whenever Ryan thought of her, he could still feel the memory of every tantalizing brush of her lips, every inch of her skin igniting like a trail of fire, an addictive rush, even before her magic reached full strength. Now, with her powers fully unleashed, one sultry glance from her could send a wizard into a daze. Ryan himself often had to lean against a wall just to steady his heart. The only person who'd once held such sway over him had been Nagini, and while Nagini's weapon was brute force, Fleur's was pure, irresistible magic. "What are you daydreaming about, kid?" Kate teased, sizing him up with a knowing grin. She glanced from her own plain features to Penelope's curious expression, convinced, like any ex-wife, that Ryan's thoughts were undoubtedly lewd. Even Penelope watched him with narrowed eyes. "Nothing," he lied. "I was just remembering how Potter and Weasley made utter fools of themselves," Ryan said, flicking his wand. In an instant, the walls of the room dissolved into the cobbled streets of Diagon Alley. There stood Harry and Ron before a peculiar shopfront shaped like a giant open dictionary, its facade a living tapestry of leather-bound pages and faded print. The scene crackled with their unmistakable awkwardness, proof that some things never changed, no matter where you cast your memory. The entrance to Flourish and Blots was framed like the spine of an enormous leather-bound book, its archway embossed with the words, "Purveyors of fine tomes since 1254. Harry and Ron stood just inside, voices rising in the narrow aisle between towering shelves. "It's your fault we're nearly broke," Ron accused, jabbing a finger at Harry. "You insisted we stop in here so you could have your wand checked. Now we've spent half our pocket money on maintenance fees." Harry ran a hand through his unruly hair and sighed. "Maybe so, but thanks to that little detour, I made a new friend, and you have to admit, our wands have never looked better." "Is that so?" Ron said with a grin. He drew his wand and began buffing it against his sleeve, admiring the polished finish. Immediately, every witch and wizard within earshot stiffened, hands hovering near their robes, ready to draw their own wands at the slightest provocation. Harry could practically feel the tension crackle in the air, as if Ron had whipped out a pistol instead of a wand. "Ron, enough," Harry muttered, elbowing him in the ribs. "Let's drop this before someone really does shout Expelliarmus." "But we've been out forever," Ron protested, lowering his wand and glancing at the dusty clock behind the counter. "What if Mrs. Weasley sends for us to help with dinner?" Harry offered a wry smile. "She'll manage. Come on, one more look around, then we head back. I'll even buy you a pumpkin fizz at Florian's." Reluctantly, Ron tucked his wand away. Together, they wandered deeper into the shop, the scent of old parchment and polish lingering in the air. "Fred and George will spot us any second," Harry whispered. "Why don't we just turn back?" he added. "There's nothing here for you," Ron shot back. And before Harry could respond, Ron yanked him into Flourish and Blots. Ron pointed to the window display. Where once stood neat stacks of gold-embossed spellbooks as large as floor tiles, now loomed a giant iron cage crammed with nearly 100 books. They snarled and lunged at one another, ripping pages free and tossing scraps of parchment into the air. "Merlin's beard," Harry breathed. "I wouldn't want to be the poor soul who has to sell these," Ron muttered. Harry leaned closer. The books were gorgeous. Emerald covers, titles gilded in gold, the Monster Book of Monsters. But the way they snapped and writhed like angry crabs made the whole display seem more menacing than inviting. At that moment, the shopkeeper, a tall, thin wizard with ruffled hair and a permanently irritated look, spotted Harry. "Hogwarts," he barked, then stepped forward and brusquely pushed Harry aside. "Move along, please." He donned a pair of heavy gloves, gripped the gnarled wooden cane, and strode toward the iron cage that held the Monster Book of Monsters. Ron gave Harry a gentle poke and said with a wry grin, "Well, mate, looks like luck's not on our side this time." Chapter 36. The Resigned Bookstore Manager. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Flourish and Blots on Diagon Alley, illuminating a single book hovering above the display table. Its emerald green cover bore the embossed title, Monster Book of Monsters. A shimmering, three-dimensional sketch of a snarling, many-legged creature hovered in midair above it. "That's it?" Kate folded her arms, her brow creasing in disappointment as she eyed the projection. Ryan glanced at her, amused. "What's the problem, Kate? I thought I made it clear I'm in my 3rd year already." Kate huffed. I expected something more exciting." She sniffed. "This looks like every other magical bestiary we've seen." Penelope leaned forward to study the cover. "Actually, it's remarkably comprehensive. Only Newt Scamander's own work covers a broader range. And it's fully enchanted, which is a step up from a static textbook." Ryan allowed himself a small, enigmatic smile. "Detailed isn't the same as entertaining, though." Nearby, Harry flipped through his own list of required purchases. "Hold on, might this be a textbook for another subject? Or maybe for a different year?" Ron eyed the book skeptically. "Care of Magical Creatures is my class this term, and I can't recall us needing a book that's just pages of hideous monster drawings. Where's the section on manticore taming, for instance?" Behind the counter, the shop's manager, a thin, nervous elf in a crisply starched vest, leaned forward, voice trembling with eagerness. "Are you 1st or 2nd year students? I thought this tome would be far too advanced for older classes." Ron exchanged a grin with Harry. "We appreciate your concern, but we're actually in our 3rd year and signed up for Care of Magical Creatures ourselves." At their admission, the manager's shoulders slumped. He let out a long, rueful sigh. 3rd year. I see. I had hoped this one would sell to the younger ones." Harry slid the book back onto the shelf. "Seems we'll need every copy you have, then." The elf manager pinched the bridge of his nose, resigned. Behind him, the floating beast flickered and vanished. Shoppers trickled in, oblivious to the quiet drama. But in Flourish and Blots, one thing was certain. 3rd-year creature classes would leave the shelves decidedly emptier than the manager had ever dared to hope. Harry couldn't help himself. As the bookstore manager lowered his head and shuffled toward the iron cage, his knobbly cane tapping against the stone floor, Harry spoke up. "Professor Kelborn chose these textbooks, right? You'd think he'd have given us some tips on how to handle them. How can anyone study when the books keep, well, disappearing or misbehaving? The manager straightened, shoulders sagging. He didn't say a word. Harry crossed his arms, watching the man's reaction. Usually when a professor stays silent, it means he doubts our ability to keep things intact. Exactly like with the invisible book of invisibility, Ron chimed in. Professor Wilk, our defense against the dark arts teacher, never warned us about its invisibility. Not until we'd already lost half the copies and begged him for help, Harry added. Then, he reluctantly taught us a simple counter-invisibility spell. The manager let out a long, exasperated sigh. He leaned heavily on his cane, and the iron cage rattled. And look where that got us. We're still missing 200 of those outrageously expensive volumes. Ron's eyes went wide. 200? At Hogwarts, we never had that many to begin with. So much for troubleshooting your own textbooks, Harry muttered, glancing from the manager to Ron. No wonder we're in this mess. Harry frowned at the beleaguered shopkeeper. If you can't track them down yourself, couldn't you summon Professor Wen or another specialist to help? The manager rubbed his temples. Sure, if you're willing to part with a few gold galleons, but these particular volumes, they're invisible. You'd have to feel your way inch by inch through every shelf. Ron exchanged a glance with Harry. Exactly. You see, these books were enchanted by Professor Wen himself. No ordinary wizard or muggle could locate them. The shopkeeper sighed. Professor Wen, the one who just took over Defense Against the Dark Arts a month ago? He's been at St. Mungo's since one of his experiments went awry. He won't be discharged anytime soon. And beyond that, Ron continued, these tomes contain the most advanced invisibility primes. Wayne reserved them as special material for 7th years. There simply isn't a non-magical way to find them. Even if we stripped this place bare and dusted every inch with flour, those books would still elude us, the manager admitted, leaning heavily on his cane. With a resigned groan, he clutched 2 hefty volumes to his chest, warded off the eager students pressing in, and sank to the floor, sitting squarely on the pair of books in his arms. Harry stepped into Flourish and Blots, where shafts of sunlight picked out motes of dust, floating between shelves crammed with books. After a quick browse, he approached the counter. The shopkeeper, an eager fellow with ink-stained fingers, pulled a fresh length of hemp rope from a shelf and expertly bound 2 textbooks together. That'll be 8 gold galleons, he announced, tying off the knot. Harry slid the coins across the counter and asked, anything else I'll need for 3rd year? The shopkeeper's eyes brightened. You'll want intermediate transfiguration and standard spells, level 3. And if you're planning divination or arithmancy, you'll need Seeing the Future Through the Mist by Cassandra Vabersky. Harry frowned. What about ancient runes? The shopkeeper paused, tapping his lip. That used to be Professor Bathsheba Babbling's class. Had she not retired, students would use advanced rune translation, an introduction to ancient runes, magic symbols, the rune dictionary, a magic pronunciation table. He trailed off. But those are strictly reference books, all held in the Hogwarts library for homework. They're not official class texts. Harry folded his arms. I'd still like to have my own copies, if you can order them. At once the shopkeeper froze, his face paling. He peered at Harry over round spectacles. You haven't actually received your official Hogwarts book list yet, have you? Harry and Ron stepped into Flourish and Blots, scanning the shelves crowded with flying books and stacked tomes. The shopkeeper, a thin man with elbow patches on his burgundy robes, eyebrowed them curiously. Not students of Beauxbaton, Durmstrang, or Castello Bruxo, I take it? He said. In any case, you'll be wanting these 2 books, he added, pointing to a display. Harry held up his list. Actually, we haven't received the official Hogwarts list yet, but if you have a copy of Transfiguration Intermediate, Standard Spells Level 3, and Seeing the Future Through the Mist, we'd like those as well. The shopkeeper's lips curled into a half-smile. You're taking my word for it? Ron folded his arms, cheeks flushing. Don't you recognize me? I'm Ron Weasley. I got my Skywalker Gold card on my very first year at Hogwarts. And I've been in the Daily Prophet, Harry cut in gently, hoping to smooth things over. But Ron waved him down, determined to prove his point. How else could I be mixed up with those other schools? Ron demanded. I'm from Hogwarts, obviously. The bookseller arched an eyebrow, turning dismissively toward Harry before addressing Ron again. Weasley, you say? Son of the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Yet, he paused, tapping a long finger against his chin. It's the scar and the hair I'm more interested in. He fixed Harry with a steady look. Black hair, lightning bolt's scar, Harry Potter. Harry stifled a sigh. He knew Ron cared deeply about his reputation, perhaps a little too much. And here, of all places, was Ron, firing off his credentials to a man more intrigued by an overgrown orphan with a knack for surviving dark magic than by the prideful second son of one of Britain's most influential wizards. Harry's hand shot out to grab Ron's arm and clamp a hand over his mouth, only to freeze in midair. Ron was staring straight ahead, completely dumbstruck, his cheeks burning crimson. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only strangled squeaks emerged. The same frozen expression had overtaken the shopkeeper behind them. Harry followed their line of sight to the doorway. There, framed by the dim light of the entryway, stood a girl who seemed to command the entire room. She moved with effortless grace, her long silver hair tumbling like a waterfall to her waist. Her large blue eyes shimmered beneath dark lashes, and whenever she smiled, her flawless white teeth gleamed. You really think the other 3 wizarding schools are rubbish next to Hogwarts? She asked softly, a playful challenge in her voice. Ron tried to answer, but managed only a strangled noise. The shopkeeper let out a muffled sound, her eyes widening. The girl stepped forward. What about Beauxbatons? I happen to come from there. She swept a hand through her silver hair, eyes flicking over Ron's stunned face. Beauxbatons is in France. Enough said, right? A gruff voice piped up from the back of the shop. Don't even mention Hogwarts. It doesn't hold a candle to Durmstrang's darker charms. Realizing the shopkeeper was about to protest, Ron reflexively covered her mouth. Then, in a rush of panic-tinged politeness, he cleared his throat and addressed the visitor. What's your name? The girl folded her arms and leaned in, amusement dancing in her eyes. I should be asking you first. Ron Weasley, he blurted, voice trembling. A slow, teasing smile curved her lips. Very well, Ron Weasley. Since you're so proud of it, why don't you step outside and shout, I, Ron Weasley, am a bastard 10 times, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Ron's face turned an even deeper shade of red. The shopkeeper's muffled protests continued, and Harry could only gape, certain he'd just witnessed the most mortifying moment of his life. Harry called after him, and don't forget to cast the amplification charm. Right, Ron replied, his expression blank with confusion. He stumbled out of the room, dazed, while Harry watched him go in stunned silence. Chapter 37. Vila Pinello pressed a hand to her mouth in astonishment when she spotted Fleur walking into the shop. Fleur? You came to England? Kate looked equally surprised. No wonder you were so tense earlier. She followed Pinello's gaze out the front window, where Ron Weasley stood with his wand absurdly pointed at his own throat. What on earth did Ron do to offend you? Ryan shook his head. Keep reading, he muttered, but Kate was already pushing past him. Inside Flourish and Blots, Harry had drawn his wand too. He advanced on Fleur, his eyes blazing. What have you done to my friend? He demanded. Behind the counter, the manager, having just returned to his usual self, hovered nervously, sneaking anxious glances at the unfolding confrontation. Fleur turned slowly, her movement smooth and unhurried. A faint smile curved her lips. Why didn't you stop your friend when he spoke ill of my school and my country? She asked softly, as though reciting a well-practiced line. Harry felt his anger melt under her cool gaze. He opened his mouth, but no words came. All he could do was stare at the worn floorboards, unable to meet her eyes, afraid that if he did, he might forget Ginny altogether. Harry wove between the tall shelves, determined to lose himself in the crowded bookstore. But no matter how hard he tried, his feet kept carrying him back to the mysterious girl ahead. Whenever he glanced away, an intoxicating fragrance seemed to drift off her, drawing him in once more. She was dressed in the pale blue robes of Beauxbatons, quietly scanning the spines of the books. Harry watched her, heart thumping in his chest, when the shopkeeper, approaching with a friendly grin, broke the silence. A Beauxbatons student, I presume? He asked. Here to pick up your Hogwarts textbooks before the Triwizard Tournament? The girl looked up, surprised. Yes, that's right. Well, you've come to the right place, the man declared, brushing imaginary dust off his waistcoat. As the proprietor of Flourish and Blots, I know every volume in this store. Adventures, defense charms, you name it. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Between you and me, I'm single, earn a tidy salary, and I, too, am a Hogwarts alum. Gryffindor, 5th year. I even live just outside London. Harry's jaw dropped. The shopkeeper's confidence swelled with each personal detail, as though he believed he'd scored bonus points. Unable to take any more, Harry's hand twitched toward his wand. Honestly, he began under his breath. Just then, the front door swung open. A familiar, warm voice called out, and the sight of bright red hair framed in the doorway sent Harry's heart racing back to its proper rhythm. Mrs. Weasley had arrived. Mrs. Weasley yanked Ron by the ear and marched past the girl. He looked back at her, cheeks flushed, while she met his glare with the faintest, most charming smile. I don't think it's right to treat a child that way, the girl said softly. Mrs. Weasley shut her eyes, released Ron's ear, and turned to face her. I may have said some harsh things about your country and school, she admitted. I deserved that, Ron muttered, rubbing his ears and avoiding the girl's eyes. Before Mrs. Weasley could reply, the wizard behind the counter stood up. He was the new manager of the bookstore, a portly fellow with a neat beard and an air of dignity. Actually, madam, he announced, your son was the first to insult this young lady's country and school. Relief washed over Mrs. Weasley's face. She looked over at Harry, who simply nodded. She's from Beauxbatons in France, he explained quietly. Mrs. Weasley tugged Ron's ear again. Now off you go, before I change my mind about that detention. Harry followed, as Ron was half-dragged, half-strolling toward the leaky cauldron's doorway. Ron paused at the threshold, turned, and called back. I'm Ron Weasley, Ravenclaw student. See you when school starts. Once they were safely inside the pub, Mrs. Weasley let out a long breath and released Ron's ear for good. That girl has to have Vila blood in her, you know? She murmured to Harry, giving him an understanding look. Harry shook his head. What's a Vila? Mrs. Weasley smiled fondly. You'll learn soon enough. It might explain the source of that girl's uncanny allure. Mrs. Weasley set her teacup down and met Harry's curious gaze. Vila are humanoid beings who, in their natural form, look almost exactly like human women, astonishingly beautiful. Their skin glows as softly as moonlight, and their hair seems to drift and float even when there's no breeze. She paused, swallowing hard before she continued. But if a Vila becomes angry, she can shift into a terrifying bird-like creature, feathers and talons, with the power to hurl fireballs. Ginny shivered. Their beauty, though, Mrs. Weasley added quietly, carries a dangerous magic. A single glance can ensnare a man's mind, drive him to obsession. Harry frowned. Can Vila and wizards have children? Yes, Mrs. Weasley said. Hybrid Vila inherit certain traits, most notably that same breathtaking beauty and the ability to entrance men. But whether they can actually transform into the fire-throwing form, no one's really sure. Ron sprang up. What about Fleur Delacour? Will she change into one of those bird creatures too? Mrs. Weasley exchanged a look with Harry. Fleur's Vila blood has been diluted over generations. She may never manifest the full transformation, but until it happens, or doesn't, we simply don't know. Ron's scowl deepened. I can't picture her clucking around on talons like some giant rooster. Mrs. Weasley patted his shoulder. Let's hope we never have to find out. Ron was so focused on Harry that he barely noticed the woman until she stood right behind him, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Mrs. Weasley's whispered warning made him freeze. What if his mother really thought he'd gone and picked up a bird's nest instead of a new broom? Are you quite sure we're alone? She murmured, glancing down the empty alley before turning her full attention to Ron. Harry instinctively backed away, but Ron, lost in panic, didn't even register the danger. Ronald Weasley, Mrs. Weasley said, her tone low but unmistakably firm. Ron's bravado collapsed in an instant. His face drained of color, and he trembled. Mum, we were just buying our school books, he blurted. I saw the two of you together in Diagon Alley, Mrs. Weasley said quietly. Now tell me what you were really doing there. It's true, Ron hurried to explain. We needed the Monsters Book of Monsters, Intermediate Transfiguration, Standard Spells, Level 3, and, Clearing the Fog to see the future. If you don't believe me, I'll show you our book list as soon as we get home. Ron glanced at Harry, eyes wide with panic. "Harry, say something!" Harry's throat went dry. He swallowed hard. Mrs. Weasley waved her wand dismissively as she ushered Harry and Ron out of Flourish and Blots. "We're definitely buying your school books today," she declared, glancing at the piles of textbooks lining the shelves. Ron rolled his eyes. "You know, Madam Pince practically assumed we were students from one of the other Triwizard schools. Can you believe that?" Before anyone could stop him, Ron's old habit of teasing those rival schools surfaced. "I couldn't help it," he muttered, cheeks reddening. "I said all sorts of rude things." He shot Harry an embarrassed look. "You know what happened next." Harry cleared his throat, summoning his courage. "Actually, the truth is," he trailed off, trying to turn the conversation away from Ron's insults. "How exactly did we get here? Through flu powder, perhaps?" Mrs. Weasley's brows shot up, and to Ron, the arch of her brow looked very much like a tiger baring its fangs. Ron's fingers fumbled in his robe's pockets, hoping against hope to find some flu powder. His heart thundered in his chest. If she discovered it was his idea to use the mirror world again to get to Diagon Alley, it's over, he thought. If Mum realizes Harry only got here because of me, I'm done for. Before his panic could spill into words, Harry stepped forward and produced a small pouch of emerald green powder. "Here," he said softly. "I brought enough flu for the journey back." Ron exhaled so hard he nearly swayed. Relief flooded his face. "You're a lifesaver," he whispered, his voice cracking. Mrs. Weasley seized the pouch and examined it gravely. "Don't think I'm being harsh, Harry," she said, smoothing her skirts. "I only want you both safe. The wizarding world can be dangerous. You never know what you might encounter." Ron was lucky today. What if he'd met not a half-blood Vila, but a dark wizard instead? Harry and Ron exchanged sheepish looks. With a final stern nod from Mrs. Weasley, they climbed into the fireplace's hearth, prepared to flew back to the burrow, this time safely and by the book. Chapter 38. Haughty Fleur Ryan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "I saw this coming a mile off," he said, and to be honest, Ron had it coming. Kate and Penelope exchanged glances. Ryan's remark sounded harsh, but he shrugged. We all know Fleur's temper doesn't match her looks. As a half-Vila, Fleur could never fully become that mythic, fire-breathing, bird-headed creature the old legend spoke of, her wings slick with scales. Yet her temper was so fierce it might as well have been. If Fleur hadn't known that Ryan and Ron were friends, Ron's fate would have been even worse. Kate tapped her lip thoughtfully. "I don't mind Ron's joking. He can be a goof. But when he started insulting Beauxbatons, he crossed a line." Penelope nodded in agreement. "Seriously, you don't mess with their school." Ryan frowned, realizing why the girls were so offended. Britain and France had always traded barbs, and it showed in their languages. In French, syphilis is known as la maladie anglaise, the English disease, while in English, it's the French disease. In France, a condom is un manteau militaire, a military coat, but in English, it's a French letter. And to leave without saying goodbye is partir à l'anglaise in French, to leave like an Englishman. Yet in English you say, to take a French leave. This linguistic one-upsmanship stretched into every nuance of their rivalry. Ryan smirked. "Guess I should have warned Ron. Next time, he might think twice before making national jokes, especially around someone like Fleur." The two girls exchanged triumphant smiles, and Ryan settled back, secretly pleased. After all, a heated Vila was something Ron would never forget. Penelope leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "It's funny. Britain and France are always taking sly jabs at each other in every imaginable way." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Wait, so in the original timeline, Mrs. Weasley really despised Fleur? There was that much bad blood?" Penelope shrugged. Ryan watched her curiously. "You know I'm friends with Fleur," she said, almost defensively. "I remember," he replied, but his puzzled look made her smirk. "Fleur is absolutely my friend. I adore her. I have zero prejudice against the French." She paused, cleared her throat, and then launched into a perfect imitation of Fleur's accent and intonation. "I want goo-goo-goo a croissant! Goo-goo!" Ryan blinked, half expecting to see Fleur herself standing there. Kate, sitting across from them, burst out laughing and followed suit. "French people really do sound like they're making music out of their words. We don't say, 'I want some toast,' do we?" Both girls turned to Ryan, grinning. "Well?" Before he could answer, a soft, husky voice cut through the laughter. "Is that so?" They spun around, and there she was. Fleur Delacour, arms crossed, a small knowing smile playing at her lips. Penelope and Kate went utterly still. Even they, both quick to tease, had to admit it. Fleur was stunning. And now she stood in the room, ready to challenge any snarky comment they might throw her way. The courtyard fell silent in awe the moment Fleur stepped into view. Tall and graceful, with golden hair that caught the light and seemed to glow, she carried a stack of books in her slender arms. To Kate and Penelope, both Ravenclaws, it was a picture-perfect scene. Then they remembered Ryan, standing just a few paces away. Their expressions flickered with surprise, and something else, something like envy. Exchanging a quick glance, they forced polite smiles. This show-off, Kate thought, eyes narrowed. Her charms just keep escalating, Penelope mused, turning back to Ryan. Before they could recover, Fleur bounded forward, all enthusiasm. "Hello, Ryan," she called, rising on tiptoe to kiss him on each cheek. Instantly, Ryan felt a searing heat where her lips met his skin, like standing too close to a roaring fire. Back in his hometown of Chongqing, he was no stranger to spicy food, but this was a whole different kind of burn. Hot girl, he realized. Sure, some girls have fiery personalities and can handle spice, but Fleur didn't just bring the heat, she was the heat. "Hey," he managed, voice a little hoarse, still tingling from the unexpected greeting. "Hi, Fleur." Kate swooped in between Ryan and Fleur, flicking Fleur aside as if shooing away a pest. "Stay away from the brat," she snapped, then turned to Ryan, brushing his cheek with a look of mock disgust. "Ryan, it's you." Penelope stood back, barely batting an eyelash. To her, Fleur's haughty attitude was simply classic French politeness. The moment she'd woken, she'd known exactly what had happened. Only Ryan could have brought Fleur all the way from Diagon Alley to Smith Castle without any fireworks. After all, no one else could apparat onto these grounds. Kate's sudden appearance, too, had been one of Ryan's shadow-walking tricks. "Really, he just wanted to surprise you," Penelope commented coolly. Fleur rolled her eyes and lifted a lock of silvery hair. "We haven't seen each other in nearly a year," she said, her French accent fluttering over the words. "I deserved a proper welcome." Ryan grinned. "Or maybe I was just bored of watching Ron and Harry mope around here," he admitted. He glanced back toward the hallway where the other two boys lingered. "So I thought I'd bring in a new face." Kate pouted and buried her nose in Ryan's chest, exhaling a soft huff of contentment. With a casual flick of his wand, Ryan altered the scenery. In an instant, they found themselves in the castle's second-floor lounge. Bookshelves lined the walls, and on one shelf a tiny hamster ran tirelessly on a wheel inside its transparent cage. The warm glow of wall lanterns cast dancing shadows across the room, shadows that, no doubt, Ryan could manipulate just as easily as he could the very stones of the castle. But on the other side of the door stood Harry and Ron, staring at their friends with a mixture of surprise and envy. Unlike Ryan, they hadn't been privy to any of this magic, yet. They didn't have the Weasleys' famous hamster wheel, that odd little contraption said to soak up everyone's bad moods and leave you calm and cheerful. Instead, Harry and Ron found themselves standing awkwardly in the Burrow's newly expanded living room. The space was larger than ever, and a row of long, fiery red sofas had appeared in front of the fireplace. On the way back from using the flu network, Mrs. Weasley had let Ron have it with both barrels. Harry had hardly been scolded, a fact that only made him feel worse. During the entire walk, Mrs. Weasley hadn't called him Harry with her usual warmth. She'd barely spoken his name at all. Harry's heart sank. If there was one thing worse than an angry mum, it was an indifferent one. By the time the quarrel over Ron's latest escapade with Ryan had finally been settled, they'd already stepped through the hearth and found the rest of the family waiting. Everyone but Arthur was seated on the red sofas, eyes fixed on them. They didn't look upset, exactly, but neither did they look relieved. Instead, they simply waited, as though they already knew what Mrs. Weasley would say next. And for the first time, Harry wasn't sure he did. Mrs. Weasley had somehow found out that Harry and Ron had been spotted in Diagon Alley. Someone on the street must have sent word straight home. Now she stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the two of them with a mixture of exasperation and disappointment. "Harry, why don't you sit down?" she said, indicating a chair at the table. "We all know you're a good lad, so don't look so startled." Harry sank onto the bench, smoothing out his robes. Mrs. Weasley's calm but firm tone reminded him that there was no point in arguing. He glanced over at his friends. Ginny and Bill were both watching him closely. Ginny's expression was almost amused, as if to say, "It's not your fault, Harry." Bill, on the other hand, looked thoroughly pleased with himself. "This has to be Ron's doing again," Mrs. Weasley continued. "Come on, Ronald, own up. How did you persuade Harry to join you on this little adventure?" Ron shrugged, cheeks a bit pink, but eyes bright. "Mum, how did you even know we were in Diagon Alley?" he asked innocently, as though punishment were a distant possibility. "Ronald Weasley." Mrs. Weasley's voice rose an octave. "You should be ashamed of yourself. And Harry," she fixed him with a stern look, "you sat there without so much as a single protest. I think both of you can skip dinner tonight." With that, she turned on her heel and bustled out of the room, leaving Ron and Harry exchanging glances. Ginny slipped into an empty seat beside them, her smile reassuring. Bill lingered by the doorway, still shaking his head in mock disapproval. Despite the impending grounding, Harry couldn't suppress a grin. At least he wasn't sitting this one out alone. Chapter 39, Discovery of the North Sea. Ron never made it to the dinner table, but it wasn't for lack of appetite. As the family gathered, Fred and George kept discreetly sliding plates of pies, chicken drumsticks, and even bowls of steaming soup toward him. At one point, George muttered a quick incantation, so the soup bowl hovered safely into Ron's hands, much to Harry's mild disappointment. He'd been half expecting Ron to look foolish, just this once. Unbeknownst to the twins, Mrs. Weasley had noticed their antics. Yet she said nothing. Instead, when she served the next course, she quietly placed Ron's favorites, sausages, mashed potatoes, extra gravy, on the twins' plates, making sure her sons still had plenty to eat, but leaving no trace of reproach. As everyone tucked in, Harry leaned over to Ginny, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Ginny, what happened to Mum? Why does she seem like a different person now that Dad's back?" He frowned, as if the change still unbalanced him. Ginny flushed so deeply her cheeks stung. She let out a tiny, embarrassed squeak, half like a mouse, half like a mosquito. Bill glanced over from across the table, raising an eyebrow at their whispered conversation. Harry pressed on in a hushed tone. "It's really weird. She's so calm, almost distant, and she doesn't seem angry at Ron, even though—" He paused. Ron's latest mishap hadn't been that serious. Yet Harry had vanished without warning only days before, and Ron's good-natured teasing had somehow landed him back in trouble. That their mother wasn't furious struck Harry as odd. Ginny bit her lip, eyes darting toward her mother, who was quietly refilling water glasses. I don't know," she admitted softly. "Maybe Mum's just glad to have Dad home again." Beneath her voice, though, lay a note of uncertainty, and something that sounded suspiciously like worry. Bill cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Anyone want seconds?" he asked cheerily. But the question hung in the air, unanswered, as every Weasleyan guest felt the subtle shift in the room, one born of secrets left unspoken and questions still waiting to be asked. Even if Dad came home bearing good news, Mum was in no mood to spare Ron a kind glance, much less let him near the dinner table. Ginny shook her head at Harry, silently admitting she had no idea what was going on. She studied her mother's face, puzzled by the sudden intensity of her expression, and then it struck her. This was the same gleeful, vengeful look Aunt Muriel had once worn when Fred and George pranked her as children, only magnified. Ginny could practically see her mother savoring some private triumph. She turned her attention back to Dad. He sat there fidgeting, clearly bursting with news he was desperate to share, yet too afraid to speak. Every few seconds, he darted a nervous glance at Mum, just as he'd done 3 years ago when he'd finally perfected that flying car and couldn't wait to tell everyone. At last, Charlie, always the quiet one, broke the silence. "Dad, what is it? Are we inviting Aunt Muriel to stay again?" Mum's answer was immediate and forceful. "No. She definitely won't fit in when she shows up," Fred and George declared in perfect unison. "Dad, you'll never get that promotion if you keep this up," Percy chimed in, crossing his arms. Bill, who'd been idly watching Harry and Ginny flirting across the room, blinked and shook himself back to attention. "What's going on here?" Mind if I join you for dinner? Ron asked quietly, his voice carrying just enough hope to draw everyone's eyes. Harry and Ginny exchanged a quick glance but said nothing. All eyes turned to Mrs. Weasley, the only person at the table whose answer really mattered. Molly? Mr. Weasley prompted gently, looking to his wife. When she remained silent, he added, Molly, dear? After a brief, almost bashful pause, Mrs. Weasley smiled and said, The children are still welcome for dinner. Her tone was equal parts warmth and delight. Well, Arthur, she said, nodding toward her husband, you can let them know. Then, leaning toward Ron, she added with affectionate firmness, And Ron, off you go. Back to the table, please. Right? Ron exclaimed, oblivious to the undercurrent of teasing. He slipped past Fred and George with a triumphant grin. Harry couldn't help but think that Ron's good-natured stubbornness was exactly why his brothers loved to needle him so much. Children, Mr. Weasley called out, raising his glass. Yes, father, they answered in chorus, and Arthur took a satisfied sip of his sherry as the family settled back into their evening. You're all aware that Azkaban vanished long ago, Mr. Weasley began, leaning over the polished oak table in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's briefing room. Yet the Ministry still patrols the North Sea relentlessly, 24 hours a day. Bill frowned. But how could Azkaban simply disappear? We've even forgotten its exact location, as if some enchantment, the so-called Red Loyalty Curse, wiped it from our memories. Mr. Weasley smiled, pride glinting in his eyes. Credit Professor Dumbledore. A while back, he and Tom Riddle were investigating these very mysteries. They finally pinned down Azkaban's original coordinates, only to find nothing but open water. The island itself had vanished without a trace. He paused for effect, straightening his robes. Still, Dumbledore insisted we maintain constant surveillance of that stretch of sea. He believes there may yet be more to uncover. Fred and George exchanged excited glances. What sort of discovery are we talking about? Fred asked. George jumped in, voice low with intrigue. Did someone find Antonin Dolohov's body down there? Mr. Weasley's expression grew even more animated. Now that, he replied, tapping the table, is precisely the question we're here to answer. Everyone in the room already knew the tragic backstory. Before the war's end, their mother's elder brothers, Fabian and Gideon Prewett, had been ambushed by 5 Death Eaters and killed. One of those killers was Antonin Dolohov. After Voldemort's downfall, all 5 were thrown into Azkaban, but only Dolohov survived. The other 4 perished under mysterious circumstances, while he endured thanks to his formidable magical skill. Mr. Weasley shrugged. Just one of life's surprises. Anyone want to guess if the others are still out there? Bill shot up his hand. Bellatrix Lestrange? As the eldest Weasley, he'd spent time with the Longbottoms and heard firsthand of Bella's cruelty. He'd gladly sacrifice his beloved long hair if it meant she'd met her end. Unfortunately, not yet, Mr. Weasley admitted. When no one else chimed in, he cleared his throat and revealed the real twist. The 2 Aurors on duty that night, Dick and Dax, are the ones who intercepted Dolohov. They both graduated a few years ago. Bill, Charlie, you 2 might know them. Dick really is an unusual name, Bill began, leaning back in his chair. He graduated 2 years before me and was in Hufflepuff, but I never got to know him well. Charlie shook his head. Same here. And the other fellow you mentioned, Finny Dax? I know him, Bill said. He's a Ravencrest student who made quite a stir last year, broke up with his girlfriend the moment he finished school. Charlie nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Perfect. Get them introduced. Both have plenty of eligible cousins. Mr. Weasley let out a relieved chuckle. Sounds like a plan. Dad! Bill and Charlie blurted together. Mr. Weasley held up a hand. I can manage, really. Please, go on. Bill and Charlie fell silent, watching their father turn to Molly. With an exaggerated sigh, he launched into the next part of the story. Anyway, divers recovered a set of hunting implements from the seabed, Dolohov's thigh bones and some rat bones, and they found telltale bite marks all over them. Molly, who'd been listening at the doorway, finally burst out laughing. Chapter 40. Mr. Weasley's Doubts. That evening in the Burrow's cozy kitchen, the only sound was the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Arthur Weasley sat at the scarred wooden table, a half-eaten slice of meringue pie before him. Harry leaned forward, sensing his uncle's seriousness. Arthur cleared his throat. What all this points to, he said quietly, is that the Death Eaters we've been tracking can't use magic right now. Either they've lost their wands or forgotten how to cast a single spell. Molly Weasley, seated opposite him, exchanged a worried look with Harry. And since they've been driven out to the coast, she added, their methods of finding food have become primitive. Arthur nodded. Rats, Molly. They've been reduced to snatching rats off the docks. It gets worse. He paused, glancing at the delicate bone china mug in his hand. We found a human thigh bone, Dolahov's, almost certainly. Harry's heart thudded. But he's gone? You mean he's dead? Indeed, said Arthur, swallowing the last bite of pie in one bite. Your dream, Harry, remember? You saw him offered up as a sacrifice like Quirrell, Greyback, and McNeil before him. That bone proves it. Molly's voice trembled. They actually broke off his leg and turned it into a weapon? It shows how desperate they are, Arthur replied, setting down his fork. No tools, no magic, so they desecrate their own dead. I can't get the image out of my mind. A rough-hewn bone, then polished smooth against stone. Harry swallowed hard, picturing it. Molly gripped his hand. Arthur met his wife's gaze, sorrow in his eyes. It gets more horrifying, he said. A man named Klein, whose entire family Dolohov slaughtered, took that thigh bone and fashioned it into table legs. A shudder ran through Harry. The idea of someone sitting at a table built from a Death Eater's thigh bone made his skin crawl. Molly closed her eyes, and Arthur stared at the untouched pie on his plate, the lines on his face deepening. In the dim lamplight, the Weasleys sat in heavy silence, each lost in the grim reality before them, and the doubts that now clouded their fight against the darkness. He now understood why the 4 Death Eaters who'd murdered Mrs. Weasley's brothers were no longer alive. Indeed, it wasn't all that surprising. Harry's investigations had revealed that nearly 100 Death Eaters, some never even branded with the Dark Mark, had been rounded up and sent to Azkaban. Only a handful ever walked free, those deemed innocent or against whom there was insufficient evidence, and even they left with hefty fines of gold galleons. Excluding Barty Crouch Jr., who'd only just been captured, there were precisely 7 Death Eaters still imprisoned. Antonin Dolohov, Mulciber and his son, Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband Rodolphus, and her brother-in-law Rabistan, and Travers. 7, the number Voldemort himself revered as magically perfect. Yet that very fact underscored their menace. These were not forgotten names lost among hundreds. They had deliberately stationed themselves closest to the Dementors, ensuring their survival long after the others had perished. But it still feels odd, Mr. Weasley added quietly, once the initial relief had passed. Fred lifted the fragment of bone from his plate and squinted at it. Do you lot see this? He asked, holding it up. Someone's been gnawing on Dolahov's thigh bone. George grimaced. Seriously? Are you sure it's not just rats? Rats with teeth that big? Fred shot back. Come on. Well, George said, leaning in for a better look, it's morbidly fascinating. Ron, halfway through a roasted chicken leg, made a face. Can you not use words like morbid when I'm eating? I feel sick enough as it is. Fred and George ignored him. Fred tapped the bone against the table. Where do you reckon the rest of Dolahov's skeleton went? George rolled his eyes. We can't call it strange. It's curiosity. We are the sons of Arthur Weasley, Fred declared grandly. Dad's made plenty of weird mistakes. This can't be worse. George held the bow, knee thoughtfully. I bet someone's after these for dark magic. In the far corner of the hall, Bill, Charlie, and Percy huddled over their drinks. Bill set down his pumpkin juice with a sigh. I still don't buy that the Death Eaters have lost their magic entirely, he said softly. Bones are prime material for the nastiest spells, especially those belonging to a dark wizard like Antonin Dolohov. Charlie glanced around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. It's been nearly 6 months since Azkaban vanished in January. The Dementors, all the prisoners, poof, gone. Percy frowned. Maybe the Death Eaters think the bones are more useful as weapons than their own magical ability. Charlie nodded slowly. Or perhaps you're forgetting one crucial detail. The last thing Azkaban is short on, Percy began, leaning forward, is wizard bones. From across the table, his father frowned. There are graves crammed into every unused corner of that prison. Percy's eyes darkened. Exactly. I wouldn't put it past the guards, or worse, the inmates, to use magic to compensate for their lack of wands and turn those bones into diabolical artifacts. Dark magic always carries side effects, and meddling with the dead is one of the mildest horrors they could inflict. Harry shivered at the memory. It reminds me of an old witch I passed once in Nocturne Alley. She greeted me with a platter of severed nails, human nails, and her tongue looked like it was covered in moss. Ginny's voice dropped to a whisper. I heard she used to be a respected healer at St. Mungo's. After her son died, she turned to forbidden rites. Now she's that. Percy nodded grimly. I'm convinced that's what happened to the Death Eaters locked up in Azkaban. Years of dark rituals have twisted their minds. Unlike Sirius, who never lost his sense of self, they've been driven mad. Harry and Ginny exchanged a look, a quiet understanding passing between them. At that moment, Mr. Weasley tapped his teacup with the side of his fork. Ding, ding, ding! And every pair of eyes at the table turned toward him. Mr. Weasley leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the tabletop. What puzzles me most, he began, are the rats. Bill looked up. Rats? There aren't supposed to be any rats on that island. Or at least none have ever been documented, Mr. Weasley corrected. You'll recall that Dementors never actually eat animals. That's how Sirius managed to transform into a dog and slip through Azkaban's defenses. Yet small creatures like rats would almost certainly perish in the Dementor's aura of cold and despair long before they could be consumed. Bill raised an eyebrow. A magical biologist once conducted an experiment. He introduced mice into a Dementor-infested area and concluded that the rodents simply froze to death. The Dementors didn't bother eating them at all. Exactly, Mr. Weasley agreed. But suppose some clever rats burrowed deep enough underground to escape the Dementor's influence. Bill picked up his quill. If the island itself vanished, as we now know it did, any rats hiding below ground could have remained safely hidden. When the island reappeared, those survivors might have ventured to the surface only to be discovered and eaten by Death Eaters. Their bones could easily have washed into the sea and drifted to nearby uninhabited isles in the North Sea. Mr. Weasley pointed to a chart spread across the table. There are several deserted islands out there where those remains might have landed. Ron, as usual, couldn't resist offering his unfiltered 2 cents. But those bite marks look human to me. Maybe rats had nothing to do with it after all. Chapter 7. Bones on the Shore. Arthur Weasley's cheerful face drained of color as he set down the leather satchel on the kitchen table. Harry and Ron, who had been waiting anxiously, exchanged a worried glance. Mrs. Weasley stopped knitting mid-stitch. I'm afraid there's no mistake, Mr. Weasley said, voice tight. He opened the satchel and withdrew a small glass jar. Inside lay a lee of bleached bones. This morning, at dawn, we found dozens of rat bones and human remains washed up inside the quarantine zone. Mrs. Weasley gasped, her knitting needles clattering against the china plate in front of her. But we isolated that entire stretch of coastline under Dumbledore's instructions. We left it open only to the seawater. Nothing was supposed to get in or out. Ron, who had been hovering by the hearth, froze. Bones, he whispered. His face went pale. I thought Dumbledore's barrier would keep out anything dangerous. Mrs. Weasley shot Ron a look that could have stopped a troll in its tracks. Ron shrank back into his chair, avoiding her eyes entirely. Harry cleared his throat and rose from his place. Actually, he said, stepping between Ron and Mrs. Weasley before she could strike, could it be that the barrier itself drove the Death Eaters, if they're responsible, into desperation? If they couldn't travel freely, they might have resorted to scavenging rats, or worse. Ron's ears perked up, and he bolted upright. That makes sense. I've been thinking. He paused as Mrs. Weasley whirled to face him, knitting needles raised. Ron gulped, then plunged on. Why don't we contaminate the quarantine zone? If we poisoned the seawater in that area, we'd cut off their last food source. Silence fell over the Burrows' kitchen. Harry stared at Ron in alarm, realizing the kind of chaos that suggestion could unleash. Mrs. Weasley's needles twitched, her expression a storm of fury and fear, and Arthur Weasley placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder, steeling himself for the impossible decision ahead. Chapter 41. Snape's Warning. Poison? Mrs. Weasley echoed, tilting her head as if weighing the word's promise. Harry noticed the tension drain from her face. Her kindness, briefly lost, returned in full. She shot a glance at Arthur. Grab your quill, dear. Write to Severus at once. Arthur fumbled for parchment as Mrs. Weasley continued. Ask him if he knows of any potions or curses that could do the job. Our guests won't touch seawater. But there's fresh water on the island, Mr. Weasley objected, shaking his head. If the protective enchantment holds back the sea, why not let fish pass through the barrier? Mrs. Weasley's eyes lit up. Exactly. All we need is a toxin that adheres to the fish but won't kill them outright. So when our adversaries eat the fish, the poison takes effect. Harry stifled a grin. He'd noticed she'd stopped calling him Professor Snape, opting instead for the more familiar Severus. A small sign that, at least for now, his mother-in-law approved of the plan, and the man behind it. Arthur's quill scratched furiously across the parchment. This could really work, he murmured. Then, with a quiet pop, he apparated away, leaving only the distant creak of floorboards overhead. Later that night, Harry slipped into the burrow's overgrown garden. With a few deft swishes of his wand, he braided the thick vines into a sturdy hammock and hung it between two gnarled trees. Satisfied, he climbed in, letting the gentle sway lull him as he prepared for whatever dawn would bring. Spell after spell shimmered through the air, sending mosquitoes swarming off and warding against any goblins that might be lurking nearby. Under a star-strewn sky, the pond's surface glowed a deep, almost emerald green. In a hammock strung between two ancient oaks, Harry and Ginny settled side by side, reliving the day's magic. I'm so relieved Ron kept himself busy writing letters to his new friend, Harry said, leaning back. Ginny laughed softly and twirled a strand of her fiery hair around her finger. What's her name again? Wayne Campbell? Harry nodded, though his mind was elsewhere, captivated by the moonlight tracing the curve of Ginny's jaw and falling in pale beams across her freckled nose. She looked impossibly beautiful in that silver glow. Harry! Ginny's voice snapped him back. He blinked. Sorry. What was that? I said you did great today. Ginny's smile was warm, but her eyes held a playful challenge. Harry grinned and drew her into a gentle embrace. His lips brushed hers, speaking the words he couldn't quite voice. Pulling back, Ginny pointed at his mouth. Repeat it. With a mischievous glint, Harry pretended to nibble her fingertip, but Ginny slipped away, her laughter tinkling like a bell. Harry laughed too, heart racing. He realized then, if he didn't put his feelings into words, he'd be just as tongue-tied as Ron. Are you saying Mum's suggestion, that we stick to simple physical contact and just talk, is outlandish? Harry asked, raising an eyebrow. Ginny shook her head, though her lips pressed into a thin line. Ron would be furious if he heard you calling his idea absurd. Harry frowned. He knew that was polite Weasley speak for, you're wrong. So you think Ron and I are being reckless by even considering using the mirror world's abilities? I believe in you, Ginny said quietly, still shaking her head. What I don't believe in is how you behaved with that half-blood Vila. Harry sighed. I knew I shouldn't have dragged that into things. Ginny crossed her arms. Ron can be right sometimes, you know. Harry rolled his eyes, then jabbed a finger at her. She's a Vila, Gin. Half-blood or not, anyone be drawn to her. Ginny made a face. In France, single witches outnumber single wizards because so many pure-blood families refuse to marry Vila. If it weren't for that old-fashioned bloodline prejudice, there'd be even fewer eligible witches. Harry nodded, running a hand through his hair. Fine, maybe Mum's rule, no magic, just words and touch, does make sense. It keeps us from arging in without thinking. Ginny offered a small, wry smile. Exactly. Sometimes the simplest approach is also the safest. Much of France's unusually high number of half-blood wizards, children of Muggle mothers and wizard fathers, stems from its national history, yet that very fact fueled the fiercest pockets of resistance against Grindelwald, leading, in an act of terror, to the burning of Paris. After all, most French witches and wizards had beloved Muggle relatives they would die to protect. Harry, of course, couldn't have known any of that, nor could he have heard the private swirl of annoyance in Ginny's mind. To him, she simply sounded irritated, her voice laced with sarcasm. Determined to distract her, he plunged headlong into the only form of confession he really knew, Quidditch-inspired poetry. Ginny, he began, trying to catch her eye, the instant I saw you, my heart turned into a quaffle, wild, spinning, and impossible to catch. And here I am, a lowly chaser, destined to spend the rest of my days chasing after it. He paused, took a breath, and forged on. You are the phoenix song in my chest, the secret pulse beneath my skin, the fierce spark that lights me up when everything else goes dark. Still, Ginny said nothing. His palms went sweaty. This was turning into a disaster. So he reached for what he hoped would be a knockout blow, even if it sounded more theatrical than romantic. Honestly, if you were you-know-who himself, I'd still kneel for a kiss of your invisible lips, cradle that pale, waxen face, and surrender myself to whatever green sparks your love might send flying. He stopped there, certain he'd lost her forever. Then Ginny burst out laughing, clear, bright, utterly genuine. You know, she said between chuckles, if you can make me laugh after that, I think I can forgive you. Suppressing the last of her mock severity, she shook her head, a fond smile at the corners of her mouth. Harry nodded eagerly. His eyes are the green of freshly pickled toads. His hair is dark and handsome as a blackboard. I hope he's mine, truly brave enough to defeat the Dark Lord. Ginny squeezed her eyes shut and turned away, struggling not to laugh. What exquisite poetry, Harry. But Ginny, Harry asked, frowning, do my eyes really look like pickled toads? She said nothing, her face drained of color. Harry's instincts snapped into place. He drew his wand in a flash and pivoted, his back automatically shielding Ginny. High above them, a massive black shape swooped down, Professor Snape, silent as a bat. Without hesitation, Harry unleashed a swirl of wind magic, whisking Ginny out of sight into the blind spot of Snape's view. He barely paused before crying, Protego Maxima! The sudden gust dispersed, revealing Snape standing where the bat's wings had just fanned the air. Harry lowered his wand, cheeks burning. It's you, Professor, he managed with an embarrassed grin, tucking the wand back into his pocket. He reached for Ginny, who peeked around his side, her hair a tangled mess. Harry straightened her hair and muttered under his breath, Blasted frogs by the pond, if only their croaking hadn't drowned out the Flu Network's crackle. He glanced back at Snape, who regarded them coolly. Harry gave a respectful nod. Sorry, sir. Next time I'll pay closer attention. Chapter 7, Snape's Warning. Why use apparition? Ginny Weasley sighed, half exasperated, half amused. Very nice poem. Before Harry could reply, a flash of emerald light filled the room, and Professor Severus Snape stood in the center of the Burrow's parlor. His black cloak billowed around him, his face as pale and still as usual, though a keen observer might have noticed the muscles in his jaw twitching. Miss Weasley, he said, voice cold and precise. When did you arrive? Ginny exchanged a startled look with Harry. He felt his throat go dry, his pulse hammering in his ears. He strained to read Snape's unreadable features, but the professor's dark eyes were like twin tunnels, swallowing all warmth and light. Snape turned his gaze to Harry. Potter, since Voldemort's return and the green light of love, your priorities seem to have shifted. His tone remained flat, but Harry sensed the undercurrent of anger. After a moment's pause, Snape spoke again, more quietly. It's for the best. Voldemort will soon be nothing but a memory. He took a deliberate step closer, pinning Harry with that steely stare. The mirror world, the Pluto dragon, these are not matters you should concern yourself with. Your life does not belong to you alone, Potter. Snape's glance flickered to Ginny's vivid red hair, then back to Harry's unruly black curls. The corner of his mouth twitched into something like a sneer. Without another word, he pivoted, strode to the hallway, and vanished into the warm glow of the Burrow's lamps. In the sudden hush, Harry felt as though Snape had dragged him into an abyss, a darkness deeper than any cloaked shadow. Alone with Ginny once more, he realized how much weight those parting words carried, and how unprepared he felt for what lay ahead. Chapter 42. An Attempt Doomed to Fail. Harry stood frozen, watching Snape's retreating figure. He knew exactly what the professor had glimpsed, images of himself, black hair ruffled in the wind, and Lily Evans, her red hair brilliant even in memory. The visions had come both from the past and from Harry's own dreams, and now they were laid bare before Snape. A sudden sense of urgency gripped him. After days of painstaking effort, Harry had managed to carve only 79 words onto the pudding. Worse still, the more he accomplished, the more agonizing each new word became. What if he couldn't finish the task in time? Panic fluttered in his chest. Ginny, unaware of his turmoil, stood beside him. She had thought only that Harry had been startled by Snape's abrupt arrival. She reached up to smooth the strands of hair that the wind had tousled. Harry offered a gentle stroke of reassurance, yet even after he'd tried to straighten it, her hair remained a bit unruly. "Harry," she said, brushing a stray lock behind her ear, "so Ron's idea really might work?" Her voice was hopeful but edged with uncertainty. Harry forced a small smile. "I think it's the best shot we've got." Ginny glanced at her reflection in a nearby window. "It's not perfect," she murmured. Though Harry's gesture had helped, her hair was still more disheveled than before. It might have been fine by Ron's easygoing standards, but for her own part, she preferred things just a little neater. Harry swallowed. He'd promised Ron he'd see this through. Now, with the clock ticking and only a handful of words left to carve, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. This attempt might very well be doomed to fail, but he would not give up without a fight. "What?" Harry stared at Ron in disbelief. "Oh, just a thought," Ron replied with a shrug. "But the Death Eaters haven't fished in ages. They've been down to eating mice," Harry pressed on. "Do you really think they'll wade back into the sea? And even if they did, Voldemort's barrier around the island would stop any outside threat in its tracks. If the goal was to keep them from fishing, why not just seed that stretch of water with a long-lasting poisonous potion that turns to gas over time? It'd be far more effective than teaching hardened dark wizards to cast nets." Ron opened his mouth to retort, but Ginny cut in. She gazed down at the burrow's rooftop, her expression thoughtful. "I'm certain Professor Snape's plan is far more sophisticated than anything you're proposing, Ron." What Harry, Ron, Ginny, and the rest of the Weasleys didn't realize was that all these defenses, from the island's concealed wards to the prison's ever-expanding walls, were the handiwork of a single man, Ryan. Over the years, Azkaban had swelled into the largest penitentiary in the wizarding world. With no death penalty to relieve its ranks and Dementors ensuring the inmates' everlasting despair, its boundaries were stretched year after year. And ever since that horrific escape attempt, the Ministry of Magic had been loath to set foot near the island prison again, lest they be swallowed by its bleak reputation. A massive stockpile of food had been stored inside the prison and kept fresh by powerful preservation charms. It should sustain the 7 remaining Death Eaters for an entire year. Until now, they'd only hunted small game, rats or birds, to supplement their rations and enjoy fresh meat. But Ryan had other plans. To boost the entertainment value of his Death Eaters on a Deserted Island series, he made a subtle alteration to the food protection magic. The change was almost accidental. He'd intended only to tweak the conservation spells, but it ended up forcing the Death Eaters and the newly resurrected Voldemort himself to fend for their own sustenance. As if that weren't enough, a string of accidents had rendered the Death Eaters' wands useless, leaving them completely cut off from their usual dark magic. Now every morsel of food depended on their own resourcefulness, hunting, trapping, and foraging. Ryan even went so far as to teleport in a colony of sewer rats from London, ensuring the isolated group at least had some fresh meat to chase down. But Ryan had more pressing concerns than congratulating himself on his benevolence. At headquarters, Kate and Penelope had gathered around Ron, drawn in by his latest proposal. Even Fleur Delacour had stopped to listen. Honestly, Fleur admitted with a reluctant smile, that infuriating red-haired boy's idea might just work. And Snape, Penelope added, he's actually agreed to apparat directly to the burrow. Right now. Kate scowled. Great, she snapped, just when I was about to tear Ginny's poem to shreds. She tossed her hair in exasperation, but her eyes glittered with anticipation. It looked as though Ron's plan, whatever it might be, was finally gathering enough support to put into action. Penelope hovered at the threshold of the bathroom, turned cosmic vault, its porcelain walls dissolved into a boundless starfield. Streams of starlight spiraled around them, the Milky Way flowing like liquid silver. She turned to Ryan. What do you think? Ryan studied the swirling constellations for a long moment. Remember those rats we released on the island? Penelope nodded. Everything rides on your call. It's exactly like when we worried Voldemort's resurrection would ruin our exams, and you delayed him. This time, only you can say whether this scheme has any chance of working. And if it is feasible, will you pull back just to keep things interesting? She outlined her fears. The Weasleys and the others had been ecstatic, and even Snape had expressed relief. None of them had bothered to consult Dumbledore or Riddle himself. That vanished island, and the barrier that isolated it from the outside world, she argued, were metaphors for Voldemort. His Death Eaters dwelt within that ring of magic, as though it were his very psyche. His subconscious would adamantly reject anything threatening the lives of his followers. In effect, he had become the island's destiny. Ryan's eyes glinted with something like awe. "It's the same principle as my moon avatar," he murmured. "An illusory giant god, yet contained within my true self, a self creating an entire independent world, a foreign realm." He lifted a hand, tracing a constellation that hadn't existed moments before. "This place, the bathroom-turned-galaxy, is proof, a universe on the inside, born of a single mind." Penelope let the revelation sink in. In that instant, the barrier between them and the stars felt as fragile and as pivotal as the boundary guarding the island from the world beyond. All that remained was Ryan's final judgment. Within each of the illusory stars painted on that enchanted canvas, a fragment of mermaid spirit stirs. These spirits, breathed to life by Ryan himself, have become the star masters of their realms. Charged with guiding the ignorant consciousnesses that inhabit their worlds, they shepherd endless cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. With every turn of this cosmic wheel, Ryan gathers the vital energies he needs to strengthen his own power. This masterwork marks a pivotal step in the demigod wizard's return to the domain once held by the ancients, the true realm of the gods. In ages long past, the greatest of those legendary wizards wielded magic so potent that they reshaped the very fabric of space. Their collective will and enchantments suffused that expanse, forging what mortals would call the kingdom of the gods. Within its bounds, the most exalted among them could even spawn and sustain life, witnessing beings come into being, flourish, and ultimately pass away under their divine watch. Of all the demigod wizards alive today, only Lord Voldemort has ever brushed against such heights. By means of the spring water's miraculous resurrection, he briefly pierced the veil of that celestial realm, only to have it slip from his grasp as soon as his soul was fully restored. Even so, that fleeting union brought him undeniably closer to true godhood than any before him. "Can Dumbledore and Riddle sense this too?" Kate asked, her voice a tense whisper of wonder and urgency. At Hogwarts, Kate had once been convinced that, if she unleashed her full power, she could slay either of them. Yet now, standing beside the North Sea, she sensed nothing of the looming threat Ryan had described. Ryan caught the hesitation in her expression. "You rely too heavily on speed, and that lethal venom you fold into your spells," Ryan said. "Your magical knowledge, your skill, even your grasp of pure arcane essence, they're simply not on their level. You're strong, yes, but among wizards, you're still ordinary." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Dumbledore is something else entirely, a demigod of magic who's tapped directly into its deepest source. And Riddle? He's essentially half of Voldemort made manifest, awakened to that same primal core. Had he not abandoned his original ambitions, he'd have reached demigod status himself." They pressed forward into a veil of sea mist, and at once Kate felt it, a stirring beneath the waves. Voldemort, dormant yet undeniable, hovered on the brink of existence and oblivion. Ryan met her gaze. Kate drew a steadying breath and fell into the strategy laid out for her from the start: use her superhuman strength to outmaneuver them. After all, pure blood or not, wizards remain human in flesh, and she would exploit that to the very last ounce of her power. The same applies to demigod wizards. Chapter 43. The Horcrux Debate. Ryan never expected the conversation to go in this direction. "Ryan, darling, I'm telling you, cockroaches are surprisingly delicious," Penelope declared, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "If the Death Eaters subsist on mice alone, they'll be starving," Kate shot back, rubbing her arm where Ryan had playfully tapped her a moment before. Watching him corral a dozen squeaking rodents across the table had given her a sudden inspiration. Why not design an actual menu for their enemies? "Mice first, then cockroaches. Works perfectly," Penelope continued, as though listing gourmet courses. "Actually, I think bats would be more fitting," Fleur offered in her characteristic husky voice. "Mice with wings," Penelope laughed. "Novelty value through the roof." Ryan arched an eyebrow. "I have an even better idea. Horclups." "Horclups?" Kate echoed, wrinkling her nose. "Those pink, spiky, mushroom-like creatures?" "Well, They are magical, Fleur said thoughtfully, clearing her throat. And more substantial than a scrawny mouse, Kate added. Dark wizards might relish something truly exotic. Penelope shivered. Sounds terrifying. On the contrary, Fleur insisted. If you roast off the spines, the meat is surprisingly tender, and the crunch adds character. Kate grimaced. I'll stick with mice and cockroaches, thank you very much. The room erupted in laughter at the image of hardened Death Eaters grimacing over a Horcrux stew. As the debate wound down, Ryan surveyed his friends with amusement. Who would have thought that planning a villain's dinner could spark such lively and frankly grotesque conversation? In the end, whether it was mice, bats, cockroaches, or the infamous Horcrux, one thing was clear. These dark wizards were in for a truly unforgettable meal. Chapter 7. The Horcrux Experiment. What's the matter? Fleur asked, frowning at the creeping vines overtaking the greenhouse wall. Ryan shook his head. It's the Horcrux. It propagates like wildfire. Give it a few days and it'll swallow an entire garden the size of this one. And goblins can't get enough of it, added Severin, the potion master. Its juice is a key ingredient in many healing draughts. Highly nutritious, too. Fleur blinked, puzzled. Healing draughts? Nutritious? The words hung between them until, with a shared yawn, the three finally agreed to call it a night. But Fleur's curiosity wouldn't let her rest. Later that evening, she slipped back into the greenhouse and drank deeply from the amber flask of Horcrux juice. Its sweet, tangy warmth spread through her veins, answering questions she hadn't even realized she was asking. Over the next few days, Ryan's experiments expanded. He smuggled swarms of magical cockroaches, clusters of fruit bats, and, of course, fresh saplings of Horcrux into the dungeons of Azkaban, watching how each creature adapted to its new prison environment. Meanwhile, Severin's enchanted fish, originally confined to beakers and cauldrons, found their way, quite accidentally, to the frigid sea that surrounded the island. Under Ryan's careful guidance, those fish underwent startling transformations, their scales shimmering with uncanny bioluminescence. Ryan captured every twist on his enchanted lens, certain he'd made a discovery that would set the wizarding world abuzz. Late one afternoon, he climbed the narrow spiral stairs to the top of Smith Castle's observation tower. From here, the view was unforgettable. Beyond the jagged ramparts lay the canyon where Voldemort himself had dispatched his armies on 3 separate occasions, leaving behind bleached remains as a grim testament to his power. Ryan pressed play on his recorder and watched the footage again. When the last mutated fish flickered off the screen, he exhaled with satisfaction. This episode is going to be huge, he murmured, his eyes gleaming. He glanced down at the ancient stone courtyard and thought of the 4 of them, Fleur, Severin, himself, and the quiet apprentice they'd rescued last winter, and felt a surge of pride. In the heart of summer, here at the secret family stronghold, known only as Smith Castle, their unconventional research was about to change everything. At dusk, the last golden shafts of sunlight filtered through Nottingham Forest's towering oaks as Kate and Ryan crouched beside a half-buried skeleton. They'd turned this grim business into a detective game, studying bones, speculating who they'd belong to, though neither would have admitted it was anything less than serious work. Kate brushed a stray leaf from her robe and glanced up at Ryan. "Which episode are we on?" she asked, voice low. Ryan flashed a wicked grin. "The one you've been talking about. Death Eaters on a deserted island." He leaned closer. The corners of his mouth twitched with mischief. Without warning, Kate lunged playfully and clambered onto his back. In a heartbeat, a silver rune, the mark of connection, blazed along the back of her hand as she tried to slip into Ryan's senses and glimpse the episode in advance. But no matter how she strained, the spell sputtered and died. "Do you really want to see it?" Ryan taunted, though his eyes shone with amusement. Kate froze. "No, I mean yes, but no!" She wriggled, attempting to melt into the shadows under the great trees. Ryan laughed. With one hand he caught her robe's hood and began to swing it gently, like a child's yo-yo. A warm red glow rippled around her, the magic stirring, but then just as quickly it vanished. Kate's silver rune winked out, undone by the simplicity of his gesture. Defeated, Kate sighed and draped her arms around his neck, resting her cheek against his shoulder. Ryan's grin widened, and with his free hand aglow in soft silver light, he gave her a playful tap on the bottom. "See? Impossible to resist, he whispered, the forest shadows deepening around them. Kate huffed, but clung tighter. Whatever episode lay ahead, she'd face it with Ryan by her side. At that moment, Ryan projected the bizarre vision from the island straight into Kate's mind. She recoiled as though she'd swallowed pure terror, wanting nothing more than to gouge her eyes out and wash them clean. The rest of them behaved like Aunt Dumbledore's infamous fiancée, but Bella, somehow she alone seemed normal. Perhaps it made sense only because she was a girl, and her shock felt appropriate rather than unsettling. "Kate, what's wrong?" Penelope called, breaking away from Fleur's furious screams echoing from the tower. She rushed over to find Kate trembling against Ryan, her voice little more than a tortured whimper. "Penelope, I'm tainted," Kate gasped, burying her face in Ryan's shoulder. Kate jerked away with a guttural cry. "No, no more of this." Before she could fall, Penelope caught her in a firm embrace. "It was you who insisted on seeing it," Penelope scolded softly, shooting Ryan a sharp look. "What did she see?" Kate's lips quivered. I saw hell." She swallowed hard, shivering as if the memory burned her from within. Then, almost on instinct, she pointed to the grass at Ryan's feet. "That pale shape in the weeds, Ryan, is that really a fishbone?" Ryan stared down at the half-buried fragment, his eyes widening in dawning horror. Penelope paced back and forth before the cauldron, her brow furrowed. "Are we sure this is just the potion's effect? Did Snape really spike it the way Ron suggested?" Ryan stood beside her, arms folded. "He did," he confirmed. "But it isn't a straightforward poison." Kate tilted her head, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "Then why not just poison the Death Eaters outright?" Her voice carried a reckless edge. Clearing his throat, Ryan adopted a more serious tone. Because under Voldemort's lingering subconscious magic, the toxins didn't stay as they were. They mutated. "A mutation?" Penelope repeated, hands on her hips. "In what way?" Ryan glanced around as if expecting the Dark Lord himself to materialize. "They've warped into a brew that makes anyone who drinks it utterly obsessed with Horcrux." "Obsessed with Horcrux?" Penelope stared at him, incredulous. Kate, standing nearby, could barely contain a grin. Ryan nodded. "Yes, it magnifies a fixation on that one rare ingredient, Horcrux juice, while the rest of the components are lethally poisonous. The only non-toxic element is the Horcrux itself, so it becomes the target of the potion's compulsion." Penelope's eyebrows shot up. "So that's why everyone's mind is glued to Horcrux," she said slowly. "It's all in the formula," Ryan agreed. "Snape may have intended simple poison, but Voldemort's dark essence twisted it into something far more insidious, something that doesn't just kill you, but makes you crave its one harmless ingredient above all else." A flickering image materialized before Kate and Penelope. Severus Snape hunched over a battered cauldron in the cramped kitchen of his Spinner's End home. To his left, resting on a chipped wooden shelf, lay a single, unmistakable Horcrux, its polished surface catching the dim candlelight. Surrounding it were vials filled with some of the most lethal substances possible. Bubbling leopard poison, distilled to a viscous green, and the bristling crimson fangs of a giant spider soaked in its deadliest venom. Kate's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was cold as ice. "I want to see what happens when those Death Eaters wake up," she whispered, her words dripping with satisfaction. She brushed a salty drop from her cheek and looked to Penelope, a cruel determination shining in her gaze.